Good morning, good evening. Now we are going to start the 2021 Seoul Debates. Thank you very much for joining us today, offline as well as online. Due to COVID-19 regulations, it is our great regret that we are not able to accommodate too many guests on site. However, I'm very pleased to announce that we have over 200 online guests joining us from many, many countries around the world. Our UNDP Administrator, Achim Steiner, is already with us online, and we are very, very delighted and honored to have him here. Now, without further ado, I'd like to just invite Dr. Stefan Klinkerbell, the Director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, to kindly greet the guests and say a few words of welcome. Stefan?
Deputy Foreign Minister Han, President Sohn, Ambassador Oh, Administrator Steiner, distinguished speakers, excellencies, and honorable guests. I wish to welcome you all to the Seoul Debates 21. This hybrid event is jointly organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. The focus of our debate in 21 is on development cooperation and knowledge exchange, taking stock and moving forward. As we all know, the context of development cooperation is very dynamic and sometimes even challenging. This is true for development cooperation and all other areas of inter- and transnational cooperation. We experienced over the last couple of years an increasing need for more and better international cooperation. COVID-19 provides clear evidence about the high demand for effective ways of cooperation between countries, as well as effective and inclusive multilateral platforms. The challenging consequences of climate change are increasingly visible in all parts of the world. And we know that global challenges are complex. COVID-19 is much more than a health crisis. It is about socioeconomic dimensions of development. For example, inequalities within and between countries are closely related to the pandemic. Furthermore, it is about environmental sustainability of recovery strategies of countries. This is why we rely on effective mechanisms of international and transnational cooperation. The increasing need for cooperation is not always in line with the readiness of actors to organize collective action. Ideally, the increase in global challenges should lead to better and more cooperation. Development cooperation is an essential part of the global cooperation architecture. We know about the need for development cooperation to adjust because of the changing context. Just to highlight one aspect in this regard, the graduation of countries from the group of developing countries to the group of high-income countries illustrates the fundamental transformation of societies and countries. The Republic of Korea is a perfect illustration for fundamental changes. The country was able to use external support to its benefit in the course of its history. And we know that the Republic of Korea is supporting developing countries already for many years. UNDP and the Republic of Korea have a very close relationship for many decades. We have had a country office until 2009. Since 2011, the UNDP Seoul Policy Center exists. This Global Policy Center provides perfect proof for our continued close partnership with the Republic of Korea. And we are very glad to celebrate this year the 10th anniversary of the Seoul Policy Center. We use the Seoul Debates 21 to discuss the changing context and nature of development cooperation. We will focus more specifically on the knowledge dimension because we all understand that knowledge is such an important aspect of any kind of development. And we wish to discuss with some of our partners how cooperation between our center, Korean partners, and partner institutions from Bangladesh, India, and Rwanda is looking like. Honorable Deputy Minister Ham, let me already thank you and your team for great collaboration, not just in the preparation of this important event, but also for the partnership between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNDP Seoul Policy Center over the last decade. Honorable Deputy Minister, may I invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Administrator Achim Steiner, Ambassador Oh Young-ju, Director Stefan Klingebjerg, President Son Hyuk-sang, and ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Seoul Debate 2021. I wish to thank the UNDP Seoul Policy Center for co-hosting this event today. My special thanks also go to Director Stefan Klingebjerg for his excellent leadership in leading the UNDP Seoul Policy Center during the last 2 years. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been co-hosting the Seoul Debate since 2013 to provide a platform to discuss key development issues with UNDP and our partners. This year, the Seoul Debates will focus on development cooperation and knowledge exchange, especially in the post-COVID-19 era. COVID-19 pandemic has not only created immediate health and economic challenges, but it is forcing countries to rethink the development paradigm if we are to reach the SDGs by 2030. While the pandemic is putting pressure on the availability of resources for ODA, development cooperation, not only in financial terms, but also in the form of partnerships and knowledge exchange, is becoming ever more valuable. As you know well, over the years, many of our partner countries have been asking Korea to share our experiences and knowledge in developing from one of the poorest countries in the world to a full-fledged donor. To respond to this request, knowledge sharing has been a top priority in Korea's development cooperation, in addition to steadily increasing our ODA volume. Most recently, with the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, we established a task force to systemically share our experiences and know-how in tackling the pandemic with interested countries. Around 4,000 experts from 120 countries had participated in this virtual knowledge sharing platform. At the same time, under our Building Trust ODA initiative, we have been actively providing test kits and other health assistance to over 120 countries. And as President Moon Jae-in just announced at the G7 Leaders Summit, Korea will contribute $200 million to the COVAX AMC to ensure that vaccines are distributed equitably and rapidly to low and middle income countries. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, under the able leadership of Administrator Steiner, we recognize that UNDP has become more innovative and agile in spearheading global efforts to reach the SDGs. And I would like to congratulate Administrator Steiner on his well-deserved second term and wish him all the success, especially during these challenging times. Korean government attaches great importance to our strategic partnership with UNDP, and rest assured, we are committed to strengthening it even further. It is in this context that we are appreciative of our special relationship with the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, especially in terms of knowledge sharing. The center has been sharing relevant Korean policies and experiences, including lessons learned, with over 25 countries, while creating numerous knowledge products. The Seoul Debates has also been an integral part of this partnership. And as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the center this year, I believe today's debate is a good opportunity for us to envision the work of the center in the coming 10 years. With that, I thank all of you for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your insightful views on promoting knowledge exchange to build back better from the pandemic and ultimately achieve the SDGs. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As the Deputy Foreign Minister Ham highlighted, this year is the 10th year anniversary of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. So we are going to play a short video.
The year 2021 marks the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. Korea's remarkable development journey over just a few decades was the result of strong development cooperation in which UNDP was an instrumental partner. Now UNDP partners with Korea to share this highly demanded success story, which is a source of empowerment and inspiration for developing countries today. As a part of UNDP's global policy network, UNDP Seoul Policy Center supports over 24 partner countries around the world in the areas of governance, resilience, and development cooperation for the achievement of Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals. Through the Center's SDG partnerships, Korea's development experiences and innovative policy tools are shared with other countries for application to their own context. The SDG Partnership on Transparency and Accountability provides policy and programmatic support to help countries build institutions and policies to prevent corruption, as well as increase efficiency, transparency, and accountability in public construction management. The Center also collaborates with partner countries to prevent sexual and gender-based violence by sharing the knowledge Korea gained from its sustainable one-stop service centers for SGBV survivors and police capacity development for rights-based SGBV investigations. Korea's expertise in reforestation and sustainable forest management, crucial from the environmental and socioeconomic perspective, has also led to the Center's SDG Partnership on Sustainable Forestry. The Center's SDG Partnership on Development Cooperation provides partner countries an opportunity to strengthen their capacity to address the challenges of development cooperation and to provide development solutions through knowledge sharing with Korean and international counterparts. Furthermore, it strives to engage with emerging partners of development like the private sector, including impact-driven businesses and youth entrepreneurs, to mobilize innovative solutions for tackling global development challenges. Looking ahead to the next 10 years and beyond, UNDP's Seoul Policy Center will strengthen its role as a knowledge hub and continue to facilitate global dialogue on development cooperation by using Korea's unique bridging role to create even more impact for countries aiming to apply Korea's innovative policies and practices to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, we would like to now proceed the high-level policy dialogue session of the 2021 Seoul Debates. Now, I'd like to just introduce the moderator of this session, Ambassador Youngju Oh. She is currently the president of the Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security, the IFANS of the Republic of Korea. She has been a career diplomat for the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1988 and served in diverse positions, including the Director General for Development Cooperation, Deputy Permanent Representative at the Korean Permanent Mission to the United Nations in New York, Special Advisor to the Foreign Minister, and Acting Deputy Foreign Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs. She has made special contributions to the ROK and UNDP relations, and also to the development of UNDP Seoul Policy Center presenter that you just saw at the video. So it is our delight and honor to have her moderating this session. Now, Ambassador Oh.
Thank you, Ajahn, for such a kind introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. As introduced, my name is Young-Ju Oh. I'm so delighted and honored to moderate this high-level policy dialogue, which will be joined by two prominent and distinguished panelists who are here with us today via online as well as in person. Let me briefly introduce them first. We have Dr. Son Hyuk-sang, the president of KOICA, Korea's development agency, who is here with me right now in Seoul. We also have the Mr. Achim Steiner, the administrator of the United Nations Development Program and the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, who is joining us from New York via online. So I would welcome both gentlemen to this dialogue, and also my special thanks goes to the Mr. Steiner for his presence late in the evening in New York time. I really appreciate for that. And also, I'm looking forward to have very fruitful and thought-provoking discussions on the topic in front of us, which is the role of development cooperation in the global turmoil. As Stefan already mentioned in his remarks, we are really, facing volatile, unpredictable, and complex global context in many senses. COVID-19 has just triggered the onslaught of bad news for global sustainable development efforts as well. But the numerous challenges like climate change and the growth dealing of the inequality has already been present even before this pandemic. I do believe that the COVID-19 has just accelerated multidimensional crisis by adding new set of the COVID-19 induced challenges such as the global health security and vaccine inequalities to the existing and old problems. So we are right now witnessing the devastating power of the compounding crisis. Furthermore, some policy observers argue that this kind of crisis will not be any longer exception. This is our context and the condition for everything. Thus, it seems that we need some sort of the very fundamental changes and shift in our thinking, approach, and action to end this crisis as soon as possible and to prevent the next one, whatever it is, and also to make the world more sustainable, equitable, and resilient. As COVID-19 illustrated clearly, this kind of crisis cannot be fought in isolation. We should work together and work better. But I'm not sure how we can make this kind of paradigm shift, in particular in development cooperation in reality. This is the rationale of this panel. So with this, I would like to start our conversation. But before that, we have the very, short general reminder. We only have given 50 minutes in this conversation. So I would like to kindly ask the two panelists to limit their response time to 7 minutes per question. I think we can go over 3 or 3+ questions, and the organizers will give you a friendly reminder once you have 1 minute remaining. With this, let me start with the first question. I would like to start with the Dr. Son here, and as I know, you have just begun your tenure of the president of KOICA as responding to the impact and repercussions of the COVID-19 on your existing KOICA program and project. So based upon your experience so far as head of the Development Agency of Korea, how do you see the KOICA is responding and changing in face of these enormous challenges? In particular, do you believe that some paradigm shift is really needed in the way the KOICA is currently doing, in particular to prepare for next crisis? Thank you. You have the floor. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your kind introduction and million-dollar questions to me first. And it's really nice to meet Administrator Achim Steiner. And let me start right now. And it's my great pleasure to be with you all at the Seoul Debate 2021, hosted by UNDP and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. And first of all, I'd like offer my deep congratulations to Mr. Kim Steiner for his recent reappointment as a UN administrator. His reappointment is, I think, a testament that both UN members and international community are recognizing the achievement of UNDP under his leadership. I hope Administrator Steiner will be able to accomplish even more than what he did during his impressive first term. Korea and UNDP have a long history of partnership, and from 1966 to 2009, the Republic of Korea received development assistance from UNDP for about 270 projects. In dollar terms, it's around 107 millions. UNDP actually helped Korea transform itself from one of the world's first countries to a donor country. In this process, KOICA has been strengthening the partnership with the UNDP, and I hope both institutions work more closely to make this world a better place. Last year, KOICA joined other member states to help UNDP publish 2020 Human Development Report that introduces a new measurement method called Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index. And our partnership with the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, USPC, has been stronger than ever. And taking this opportunity, I'd like to thank my friend Stefan Klingebell for his effort to strengthening partnership between USPC and KOICA too. Now I move on to my question to the question. There is a saying that the longest way around is the shortest way home. And therefore, I'd like to talk about the context of the question first, briefly. We can notice there has been two notable changes in the context of development cooperation. The first is the changes in the developmental challenges. These changing developmental challenges include climate change, the COVID-19, increasing number of conflict and violence, and the refugee crisis. There are challenges that cannot be addressed by separate and siloed approaches. They all require integrated and concerted responses and actions at global scale. In addition to these challenges, new demands from the increasing number of upper middle income countries poses another new challenges to donors. Tendency of some donors to use development aid as a tool to realize their national interest makes the recipient-donor relationship more complicated. We couldn't find the second notable changes in modalities and approaches too. We are witnessing efforts to boost private sector funding and blended financing, enhance partnership with the diversifying development actors, and re-emphasize triangular and multilateral cooperation. Considering these two notable changes, we can say that ODA environment has already changed dramatically. Today's topic, development cooperation in times of global turmoil, did not come out of the blue. The COVID-19 pandemic is just a stark reminder that this global turmoil is actually happening. Taking account this changing ODA environment, KOICA has established 2021 to 2025 management strategy and developed 44 country plans. The country plans pay particular attention to the specific context of our partner countries to develop appropriate modalities and approaches of development cooperation. KOICA has also put into place medium-term strategies for priority sectors of education, health, governance, rural development, and water, transportation, energy, alongside the cross-cutting issues of climate change, human rights, and gender equality. This prioritization is also our effort to adjust our modalities and approaches to these newly emerging challenges in ODA environment. These Korea strategies are in line with the strategy of the government level. At the government level, a country partnership strategy, CPS, tailored to each country's specific context has been drafted, and it is aligned with the third basic plan for international development cooperation that sets Korea ODA's vision, mission, and the key strategy objectives giving overarching guidelines for the ODA implementing government branches for next 5 years. Underpinning this development cooperation strategy of KOICA and Korean government is the recognition that it is difficult to address these new challenges separately. As UNDP and OECD has emphasized, KOICA is planning to introduce an integrated approach in its operation. I think we should identify linkages between those challenges and find a solution that address those challenges in a holistic manner. The ABC program that KOICA implemented during COVID-19 last year is a good example of how useful an integrated approach could be. The ABC program, short for Agenda for Building Resilience Against COVID-19 through Development Cooperation, integrated development assistance to health and socio-economic sectors. Going beyond responding to immediate health crisis caused by COVID-19, KOICA sought to improve people's livelihood and employment, and also we provided support for education and health through an integrated approach. This program benefited 38 million people in 116 countries around the globe. And this integrated approach will continue until we see the end of the COVID-19 crisis. We plan to apply an integrated approach to Green ODA and also Digital ODA as well. Under the policy set forth by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we will increase the share of Green ODA among the new ODA project to 22.7% by 2025. Data released by the government shows that currently Korea's Green ODA accounts mere 6.4%. Our aim is to reach the average of OECD DAC member countries. As for the digital ODA, the ratio of digital mainstreaming among KOICA's new project will increase up to 80% by 2024. This means that 80% of KOICA's new project will relate to the various elements of digitalization and ICT promotion. I think KOICA is a very good position to design and implement its integrated approach better. As you know, the origin of integrated approach concept can be traced back to the integrated community and rural development approach of the 1970s. With that approach, development cooperation players try to meet the various, sometimes complicated demands of the rural villages. There are also both successes and failures. In Korea, we also had Semaul Undong or New Village movement. From various experiences of that movement in different places, we also learned how to make an integrated approach effective for development for all. This knowledge and lessons gained from our own experience will make KOICA's integrated approach more effective in development cooperation, in particular in achieving the SDGs, which needs to be addressed in a holistic manner. Let me stop here, and if I have another chance to come back to this issue, I talk more about KOICA's new initiatives on the integrated approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Seon. Thank you very much for such a detailed and very comprehensive response to our questions. It seems that KOICA really try hard to make a fit for new demands, new challenges. Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Steiner, let's get your perspective on similar questions. First, how do you think is the COVID-19 infecting development cooperation in the long run? Are you pessimistic or optimistic? Also, how do you see the UNDP as a leading development agency of the United Nations responding and changing in facing these enormous new challenges, including COVID-19? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Oh. It's good to see you, and thank you for accepting the invitation to moderate us tonight. Let me also thank the Deputy Minister, Deputy Mr. Han, for his kind remarks and wise remarks at this particular moment, and a warm welcome to the Seoul 2021 debates, which I am so pleased to join tonight from New York on this morning in Seoul, and hopefully with many others across the world. I also want to take this opportunity to just express my personal appreciation, since Deputy Minister Ham and also President Son just spoke about the very strong partnership that UNDP and Korea have enjoyed for many, many years. And I enjoy the images, the black and white images, because they remind us what a long journey we have walked together. And it is very much that image that I often associate with the history of UNDP with many countries. We have in many of the world's countries, and including with Korea, been partners for decades in sometimes challenging times and then in times of great success. And I think our partnership to this day remains one that is both firmly committed to development of our global community, thought leadership such as our partnerships through the Human Development Report collaboration, but also the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. And here let me also thank Stefan and his team also for preparing this year's debate together with our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It speaks to a vibrant partnership and one that does not take things for granted. And I think, Ambassador, I would say to your question, the first thing that we, I think, have had to realize is that we have been humbled as humans by a tiny virus. In just a few weeks, we saw the world, in some respects, fall apart, both by the crisis, by the health crisis, then the socioeconomic impact, but also by the seeming inability of the international community to act in unison, to act in support of one another. Certainly the pressures in each country were so strong that inevitably attention focused inwards. And yet this virus is such a demonstration of what the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, the universality of this declaration sought to highlight in 2015. Not only are we so dependent on one another, we also are affected by one another's actions, and ultimately the ability to deal with these challenges that you already alluded to in your opening comments are predicated on our ability to act in unison. The virus, ironically, is perhaps the most dramatic, synchronized illustration of such an event, perhaps in human history, certainly in the speed with which it traveled around the planet. And yet we have seen at the G20, at the World Bank, IMF annual meetings, at last year's UN General Assembly, but also at the G7, our struggle in trying to figure out how on earth are we going to deal with this virus, not only as a health crisis, as a momentary disruption, but really as a far deeper reminder. And here I think your question leads me to say that I think also following Professor Son, and I appreciated very much his remarks. He is a learned scholar as much as the president of COICA now, and has reflected deeply on these questions. I think one of the things that we have come to realize, and Korea in its own right, but also in the way it has reconceived its collaboration and development cooperation, is that what we once took for granted, which is that development and human development is almost the automatic outcome of economic growth, with simple solutions that need to be transferred, with development, capacity building, technology, and finance, we would be able to solve the great problems of our time. Well, here we are at the beginning of the 21st century, and with all the wealth of the world, three things are very striking. First of all, we have been touched by this pandemic in ways that, even though we knew it theoretically, we really did not believe could happen. We've had scenarios and role plays. We've had plannings for these events, and yet this virus still caught us unprepared. But secondly, we also have to remind ourselves that before the pandemic, already in the last 2 or 3 years, we saw an extraordinary amount of discord and dissonance in many societies across the world, and interestingly enough, not necessarily in the poorest countries. In fact, some of the most polarized political landscapes and tensions are actually visible in some of the wealthiest countries in per capita GDP terms. Inequality, unfairness, justice, these are issues that have begun to tear our societies apart, have polarized our communities, and have gone to the very fabric of what we assumed would become much more resilient societies as development progressed. And at the same time, we have hit also a point at which we have to recognize that at the beginning of the 21st century, with all the economic progress and all the wealth that we have accumulated, well over $300 trillion, unprecedented in human history, we are on the verge of actually destroying the very foundations of life on this planet. In the atmosphere, in the biosphere, in the oceans, the environmental crisis, the planetary boundaries have suddenly become very stark reminders of something that I think out of this pandemic will become very clear. We already have the narrative about not going back to where we were, building forward better, building back better. But I think it goes much deeper, and the next 12 to 24 months will be one day written about in history books as either the pivot point at which society is coming out of COVID-19 truly embraced a transformative agenda, transforming our economies, transforming the phenomena of resilience and vulnerability, but also of inequality, trying to address the fact that with 8, 9, soon perhaps 10 billion people on this planet, we have to reinvent our economies. From the decarbonization dimension related to climate change to ecological restoration and the protection of our life support systems on land in the oceans. We are at the moment practicing an economy that is still very much a 20th century extractive economy. And into all of this, development cooperation is not what it used to be. It's not about transferring a resource and essentially helping a country to grow faster. Today, we are looking, first of all, at a world that is far more emancipated, where solutions are not simply transferred, but countries, sovereign nations wish to choose their own way. They invite partners, they look to ideas, they seize opportunities along the innovation trajectory of technology, but also of good, successful public policy, and then choose to invest in their development path. We also need to recognize that international development cooperation today is more and more about co-investment and co-creation rather than transfer. And it is actually in the mutual interest of both parties to do so. That's what the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals sought to illustrate when they identified those 17 great risks to the future, and that were predicated on addressing by acting both in universal partnership. It is a universal agenda, but also by understanding that there are no simple solutions. We don't have the silver bullet. We need systemic approaches that allow us to transform our economies and societies in line with the 21st century. And it is in this landscape that we are now positioning also the role of the United Nations Development Program and indeed the contribution of the United Nations Development System. Let me stop here, Ambassador O, and respond later to your additional questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Steiner. Actually, now I come to my second question, which will go out to both panel. Mr. Steiner, you already, touched upon would be answers my second questions. My second question related to the role of development cooperation in this, changing context. The COVID-19 actually highlighted that the importance of the shared interest in common public good, global common public good, like the climate change or the global health. Also the importance of the forging solid and the innovative and broader partnerships in order to, effectively cope against this kind of crisis. But as you mentioned, that this kind of things has been already called out in Agenda 2030 when you adopted the SDGs in 2015. But in my view, that this kind has not been fully, come to fruition in reality. So also the COVID-19 also stressed the central message of the SDGs, which is that the underlying problems, economic, social, environment, is both interconnected and very urgent. So also, as you alluded, that the even higher level income countries has their own sustainable development related problems because they have to deal with the inequalities as well as environmental degradation. How about the middle income countries? They also have their own problems, even though they graduate from the ODA recipient countries. But we still have very, fixed framework of the development cooperation, at the donor level as well as international organization level. Here is my question. So how do you think that this kind of whole things will the change, the traditional way of development cooperation, in particular, the traditional way of the, aid delivery from the north into south. So now I would like to invite the Achim Steiner first. Screen is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I think, leading a program, the United Nations Development Program, in the year 21, when it was born, in fact, in another era. UNDP was born in the 1960s. It was a fund for development. It was a technical cooperation agency. It was an aid agency. I think I would argue that in today's world, that traditional notion of development aid really no longer does justice to the reality of development understood in our contemporary sense. And the way I use the term development, and as a result of it also development cooperation, really is not an end state. It is certainly not something that you can describe through graduation because you have passed a certain amount of GDP per capita or income per capita. Development is the constant search for choices and answers and opportunities that a society wishes to pursue in pursuit of development. And as Professor Amartya Sen and Mahbub ul Haq, the original intellectual creators of the Human Development Report, the Human Development Index, also described it, a human capabilities approach. Human development is more than just a phenomenon associated with physical consumption with a certain level of income. It is about the freedom to make choices about realizing your capabilities. And I say that because one of the reasons why I believe in many wealthier economies, and particularly since you mentioned middle-income countries, we confront the reality that development really is an unfinished business. Most of the world's poor today live in middle-income countries. So from the point of view of a geopolitical perspective and also a security perspective, it would be naive if we simply focused our UN offer of development support and cooperation just on least developed countries, because some of the greatest crises and flashpoints today are in fact in middle-income countries. And as I mentioned before, the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals have also specifically addressed themselves to developed economies. This is a world in which what happens in one part of the world, poor or rich, developed or developing, inevitably affects the prospects of others and other countries. And it is against this background that I think development cooperation is today transforming itself very rapidly. And sometimes the tools of our trade, traditional project finance, development effectiveness criteria, bilateral aid, technical cooperation, these are instruments that have not lost their relevance, but if they don't evolve, will increasingly become an anachronism. We need to learn to invest in one another. That involves understanding both the potential and the opportunities within a partner country. It means recognizing the entrepreneurial capacity of that country to actually deliver innovations. But it also means helping countries to develop governance systems, the rule of law, which are essentially a product of how societies would like to govern themselves. So much of what goes wrong today is actually a failure in governance. Citizens lose confidence in the state, in their governments, sometimes to the extreme point where violent extremism becomes the alternative. But it doesn't have to go that far. The protests on the streets of Hong Kong, of Paris, of Santiago de Chile, of Washington, D.C., I could go on, I think demonstrated to us that governance is not the prerogative of rich countries. It is a continuous challenge of the leadership of a nation with its citizens. And into that, there is another dimension that I think will be increasingly significant in both an opportunity and a risk. Technologies have always been not by themselves a good or a bad thing. But the next wave of technological innovation, digitalization, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, digital finance, these are developments that in a very short period of time, almost analogous to the virus, will in fact influence and affect and determine development pathways and outcomes across the globe. Understanding how to build digital ecosystems that are inclusive, that allow technology to not amplify inequalities, but to reduce inequalities, to solve the great challenges of our time, for instance, climate change, carbon emissions. It is in the wise and strategic deployment of those technologies that, one, we will get greater opportunities, and secondly, we must also learn that how the public and the private sector need to reinvent their relationship in this rapidly evolving era. If you take just the example of cryptocurrencies, be it Bitcoin, Dogecoin, or others, it is fascinating to observe right now how technology has allowed the private sector to leapfrog ahead beyond the regulatory horizon. Currencies are being established outside the domain of sovereign governments today, and we see central banks and regulators scrambling to understand how to manage this process. It's just one illustration of how technology in our age truly will change the trajectories for development and any development agency. And I know that President Son shares that, because he has also made digitalization one of the core areas for COICA's work. Is something we all have to become very literate very quickly about if we are to be relevant development partners. So these are just a few highlights of how I think that changing landscape will also change the nature of development cooperation and will change that focus on just poverty eradication. That remains a goal that is fundamental to any society, and we do not lose sight of it. But really, our focus must be on resolving the issues of legacy, such as poverty. But ultimately, development cooperation and development is about the future, about the choices we need to exercise, the tools we need to do so, and the normative and perhaps value frameworks within which to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Achim Steiner, for such an insightful response. I fully agree with your point that the technology and innovation will driving a, very important course of our development cooperation. And then with this, I'd like to invite the President Son for the discussions.
Yes, I appreciate the Mr. Steiner's comment. I really agree with him, so I'm going to make my comment as brief as possible. And as you know, they just asked me to make my comments brief too. So, all right. So as you know, COICA is its name is an acronym of COICA, Korea International Cooperation Agency. The name says COICA is not a development agency or aid agency. It's an international cooperation agency. I think international cooperation, those phrase, defines COICA's roles in development activities. In our development cooperation process, COICA does not say you should do or this or that, but we share what it did for our development, from which our partner countries can draw lessons. In international development cooperation, there is no unilateral transfer of knowledge or experience. Cooperation implies mutual relations and interactions, and learning and transfer of knowledge and experience are always mutual. We learn from each other who has different trajectories of successes and failures and share them with each other. I also would like to emphasize learning from each other among donors too. International cooperation is not only about the relationship between rich and poor countries, it's but about one between donors. The nature of forms of aid reflects donor countries' history, culture, politics, and values donors themselves learn from each other. Given the rapidly changing landscape for international cooperation, such as increasing inequalities, climate change, widened technological divide, new forms of nature of geopolitical conflicts and pandemics, the role of international cooperation is more important than ever in turning global consensus into concerted action and reality. Therefore, here comes the redefinition or the changing role of a development agency. As the various levels of global to local, international development agencies should strengthen the consensus among countries for moving away from business as usual. Development agencies may have to change their role from that of giver to that of agent of change in both developing and developed countries. Here I'd like to remind you that not only developing countries, but also developed countries are obliged to implement the SDGs. This is one of the key differences between the SDGs and all the previous globally agreed development goals, such as MDGs. The SDGs are a set of universal goals for all countries, regardless of their development stages. Developed countries also have economic, social, environmental, and governance issues to solve, just as the developing countries do. For example, when it comes to environmental issues like carbon emissions, developed countries are more responsible than developing ones. Some developed countries have also social problems of awful disparities, gender inequality, and discrimination against minorities such as migrant workers. Although developed countries are rich in terms of GDP per capita, the impoverished low-income household may suffer from extreme poverty and feel more deprived. After all, every society has its own developed challenges to solve. So we need to keep reminding that your problem can be my problem as well. To say development is only an issue for developing countries is not simply true, nor does it help or solve the problems of our society. In this situation, we cannot solve development issues through unilateral transfer of knowledge and funds in one direction as we did in the past. I believe this approach is no longer valid. I'd like to stress the importance of co-construction and facilitation when we collectively address the global challenges. Now let me touch upon the issue of aid graduation a little bit. And you know that the international community has used the level of income as a most important standard for ending aid eligibility. But we all know that income level does not cover multiple aspects of human development. Even if a country becomes an upper middle income country, the countries may still need continued development cooperation. Colombia offers a good example. Colombia recently joined the OECD, but the country remains an important development cooperation partner of Korea. This is because income growth is not equal to the absence of long-term development challenges. KOICA has yet to set a standard for the graduation from the recipient country list. We are still in discussion, but there are two core principles in setting up the standard. The first is development partnerships will continue as long as there is poverty. And second is we should not give birth to or raise aid orphans. We need to extremely carefully striking the balance between these two principles, and KOICA standard for aid graduation will be the one with that balance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Son. Actually, hearing upon the responses from two panelists, I came to realize that it will be a very huge task for all donor agencies as well as the developing agencies, global developing agencies like UNDP, to properly and efficiently address new demands of development, and as well as keeping the spirit of leaving no one left behind. With this, I would like to discuss our last question. But the thing is that we only left, only 10 minutes left for us. What I heard is that the Achim Steiner should leave us by 10:15, which means that only 12 minutes will be available. So I will go over quickly. The third question is related to the knowledge sharing, the theme of the today's debates. And it seems that the knowledge sharing getting good momentum as a driving force of the SDG implementation. Also, we see some changing narrative on knowledge sharing as well, because many, the global south is becoming knowledge provider themselves. In this light, now I would like to invite Dr. Son first. As the Deputy Minister Ham already mentioned, in his remarks, the Korean government has put a lot of emphasis on the knowledge sharing. Korea's development experience with other partner countries. I do believe that knowledge sharing still, big portion of our development ODA program. So based upon the Korea's own experience to share their knowledge, developed experience with partner countries for last 3 decades. So how do you see that what kind of lessons you can share with us, to make this, knowledge sharing as kind of engine for sustainable development implementation, please?
Yes. As you know, I was trained as a political scientist, and I had chances to come across the political philosophers and different civilizations. Let me recall something I learned from the philosophers to answer your question. And the Greek philosopher Plato famously defined knowledge, quote, justify the true belief, unquote. And many Western philosophers agree that the definition is a good place to start, although it's not complete. But in Asia, understanding of knowledge is a little bit different from that tradition. For instance, Confucius said that knowledge is the ability to distinguish between what you know and what you don't know. And he also emphasized the importance of mutual learning by saying that if 3 of us working together, at least one of the other 2 is good enough to be my teacher. I think knowledge transfer in international cooperation involves Confucius' understanding about knowledge rather than the Plato's. To take a risk of oversimplification, we can say Plato's idea about the knowledge implies when you transfer knowledge, it's justified truths that those who receive knowledge have to follow. Confucius' idea about knowledge involves importance of mutual learning, regardless of how much you know or you don't know. It demands continuous communication with each other. It means we need to have a continuous communication and co-construction to find a solution to what we don't know yet. I think this idea of attitude is central to identifying good solutions to difficult development challenges such as climate change, peace, and increasing inequality. In this idea of mutual learning, there is no one-way transfer from donor to recipient, but mutual communication and co-construction between development partners. As an empirical evidence, Korean case demonstrates the importance of this mutual learning. Koreans have realized over the course of development cooperation history that we can also learn from developing countries' experience and knowledge. And we think the process of mutual learning to produce knowledge is as important as the question of how true that knowledge is. Therefore, development partners, both donors and recipients, are both partners of knowledge exchange rather than donors as givers and recipients as receivers of knowledge. Likewise, in developed cooperation, knowledge is not transferred in only one direction, from high-income countries to developing countries. As an emerging donor, we have a vivid memory about our own development problems. We share those experiences, but we do not say our development experience and knowledge are justified the truth. We help partner countries contextualize the lessons they draw from Korean experience. This shows a kind of direction in the future knowledge transfer. More communication and co-construction with partner countries would help them search for and implement their own solutions to their own problems. We often say, don't give fish, just teach them how to fish. But we cannot teach them how to fish because we don't know their sea, their rivers, or their lakes. We only help them to find their own way to fish. I hope this way of thinking about relationship between the donors and partners should be a new direction in development cooperation. KOICA's effort to share knowledge gained from its development experience are important elements of a DEEP program. The DEEP is a short for Development Experience Exchange Program. We call it D program. The Ambassador actually led this kind of initiative when she was in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was a Director General in Development Cooperation Division. I appreciate that. And the program was jump-started as a knowledge sharing program in response to requests from developing countries. They often ask us two questions. The one is about successful transformation from the least developing countries to a donor country. The other one is about simultaneous achievement of economic development and democracy. So DEEP has two pillars: development consulting and development knowledge and experience sharing. The DEEP program largely takes the form of policy consultation and technical advice, feasibility studies, and master plan for infrastructure such as airport, dams, and roads. The outcomes of DEEP programs include new policies, laws, and institutional framework based on the policy consultation and technical advice. The feasibility studies and master plans have also led to infrastructure development project. Since it was launched in 2012, 9 years ago, 129 DEEP programs with a budget of $330 million have been implemented, benefiting 37 countries. COICA's fellowship program is also an integral part of our knowledge sharing program. On annual average, over 200 institutions provide training for civil servants invited from the developing countries, and the program is still on the way in the form of a virtual training during COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, non-face-to-face long-distance training courses were conducted for the first time, and around 900 students from 76 countries completed their courses. Let me close with a few concluding remarks. And facing the unprecedented challenges brought by the COVID-19, many people lost their lives over the past year, but we are still also reminded that it is possible to solve problems through multilateral and bilateral collaboration, such as COVAX or the vaccine donations. We already have a very clear goal as set out in the SDGs. There are also opportunities to acknowledge and address the pressing issues for humanity this year, such as through the Seoul P4G Summit in May, the London G7+4 Summit in June, and Glasgow COP26 in November. This means that we are on the right track to solve some of these global problems. However, there is a saying that even if you are on the right track and you just sit there, you will get run over. Don't forget that. What matters is action. We need to join forces and act as one. And thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Son, thank you very much for mentioning the DEEP program, which really reminded me of the old and good days. And I also believe that the knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing is kind of a social interaction, searching for good solutions for sustainable human development. Having said that, I would like to invite Mr. Steiner. I understand that you emphasized on several occasions the importance of the innovation. I also know that the Accelerate Lab is kind of a flagship initiative, and also aiming at promoting local innovative solutions. So I'd like to ask you that how we can better intertwine innovation into development, and also what is the role of the UNDP in promoting the knowledge exchanging and knowledge sharing for sustained development. Also, we just have the 2 minutes, Mr. Steiner, so that you can make some summarize or some the takeaways from the discussions as your last word. This you can have magic. So floor is yours.
So it was already very enlightening to listen to Professor Son. I think his analogy with Confucian interpretation of knowledge touched on a very real, important lesson I think we have learned. Knowledge is not something that you transfer in a mechanical sense. You create, you locate it in context. And I think if I can just use the last couple of minutes to share a little bit with you the journey of UNDP. When I was appointed in 2017, one of my key preoccupations was how can I help the Development Program of the United Nations, its largest agency, its promise to be a partner to countries in their development pathways, to be a contemporary agency and not perhaps a product of another era. And knowledge goes to the heart of it. And I would argue that very briefly, terms such as being a platform on which the world can, first of all, learn from each other. To be a connector is another vital part. Knowledge can travel instantly across the planet today, but knowledge is not the same as information. So how do you curate information so that it becomes, accessible and is utilizable as knowledge? And being an agency, UNDP is present in 170 countries. We have 19,000 staff members across the world. It's not just the global connectivity of connecting best practices and expertise in different countries. It's also how you're able to ensure that it comes with a value proposition. So we have invested heavily in our building a global policy network that allows us to connect with digital technology and the kinds of means that are available to us today. A knowledge network that is instantly accessible on the best place, best policy in one country to our team in another country that can connect the advisors to a minister, maybe a minister, even a prime minister, to another prime minister, to exchange. We did that frequently during the COVID-19 crisis when presidents, prime ministers, ministers needed instant advice, instant examples on how to set up cash transfer programs. But, and this was the other part, how do you make an agency become intelligent about where innovation and creativity and energy for transformation emanates from within a society? Very often governments are not so good at detecting this. We as development agencies being focused on intergovernmental work have also sometimes neglected this. That's where we decided to establish these accelerator labs. Teams of 3 people with very unusual CVs, people who normally would not have found their way into UNDP as a traditional employee. We created the head of experimentation, the head of exploration, just to give you 2 examples of job titles. And these 3 people are embedded in our country teams, but with a singular objective of studying innovation within a country, connecting those energy fields, if you want, to our work in advising governments on how to evolve policy, how to look at fiscal policy, how to promote opportunities for small, medium-scale enterprises, startups, the digital economy, and so on. And I think it is these tools that have allowed us to begin to evolve what is a very big international organization into a quite agile entity that is very much rooted within the country and its ecosystem of innovation, of public policy, but also connected to the world. Because in today's world, as Professor Son said, COICA already has the name International Corporation. That term is a precondition for solving many issues, climate change being just one example. And here again, what we did is we connected our climate project teams in 140, 150 countries through the Climate Promise in order to have our network work with countries to raise the level of ambition that countries will bring to this year's Conference of the Parties in Glasgow, and thereby make the Paris Agreement implementable. It's the ability to connect the local to a global public good. And this is where development cooperation, international cooperation, is fundamental to solving the great challenges of our time. And with that, Ambassador O, let me simply say it's been a fascinating discussion. And I think, as we have all sensed, we already are learning from one another just in such a conversation. Imagine the profound impact we can have when we extend that to literally millions of people who can learn from one another, co-create with one another, and as a global economy and community, we learn to invest in one another, because that is what development cooperation ultimately is all about. We need to help one another to solve problems so that we can all succeed in solving the great challenges of the 21st century. That is the promise with which we want to evolve the offer of UNDP. It reflects the Secretary General's commitment to the world and the expectations that we face. Thank you so much, and it's been a true pleasure to be part of the Seoul Debates 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Thank you very much for such a wonderful the final words. This is really take us to the conclusion of this meeting. As moderator, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the watchers, in particular joining us virtually. Also, joining us here in person. So my special thanks go to all to our wonderful and fantastic panelists who share with us their insights and critical views, which really enlightened us on the issues in front of us, development cooperation. The one thing I would like to leave the audience before we concluding is that, as Mr. Achim Steiner mentioned, that the development cooperation is about the investment in the future. In order to make this investment successful, we need to forge very solid and also very good and broad partnership and innovative partnership as well. And so I also believe that the UNDP and Korean government will continue their very valuable partnership to be a driving force to implement sustainable development based on their common challenge perception as well as their strong belief in public common goods. With this, I would like to conclude this meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, it's really nice talking to you, Mr. Steiner, and thank you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to announce that we are going to start the second session, the global turmoil implications for knowledge exchange in the context of development cooperation. Of course, the high-level policy dialogue session already touched upon the big picture, but in this session, we are going to really delve into the million-dollar questions of specifically knowledge exchange as well as development cooperation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Stefan Klingelbill, the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, to kindly take the floor and moderate the session. And we have our distinguished panelists online already with us.
Thank you, Ajong, and welcome to our panel on global turmoil, implications for knowledge exchange in the context of development cooperation. We all know knowledge is important, it's crucial, it's relevant for companies, it's relevant for public institutions, it's relevant for countries and societies, and I think COVID-19 shows to us that the pandemic management is, of course, based on knowledge aspects. So I would even claim that knowledge is the foundation for all prosperous countries. Most likely, most of you, or even all of you, can agree on this kind of central role of knowledge. At the same time, we all know that we have a couple of, let's say, tricky aspects related to knowledge. Just think about government institutions, international organizations, or private sector actors. All of them are dealing and sometimes struggling with knowledge management. How does it come that institutions might have a lot of experiences, a lot of knowledge, but not an approach to manage the entire system? Yeah? We also know that knowledge cannot easily be exported, transferred, or adjusted in another context. And I think the last panel, the first high-level dialogue panel, just provided very illustrative examples in this regard. So often successful approaches in one country or institution do fail in another context. All this is also true for development cooperation. Against this background, we want to discuss with you about your insights on the topic. And we have four distinguished panelists with us. Let me first introduce to you from New York Mr. Haoliang Chu. He is Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Bureau of Policy and Program Support, BPPS, United Nations Development Program. We have here live with us in person Ms. Kim. She is Assistant Professor at Hansung University College of Social Science, and she was a Research Fellow at Korea Institute of Public Administration, a national research institute under the Prime Minister's office, and I remember great discussions in your previous capacity on development cooperation. topics. We have online with us from India, from Mumbai, my dear friend Ms. Sandhya Iver. She is an assistant professor and chairperson of the Center for Public Policy, Habitat and Human Development at the School of Development Studies in the Tata Institute for Social Science. Last but not least, we have Mr. Bruno Carrosco from the Asian Development Bank. He leads the Asian Development Bank-wide knowledge, innovation, policies and strategies in all thematic and sector operation areas, and he ensures compliance with environment and social safeguard policies. So really great to have those distinguished for panelists with us. We prepared 3 questions to you, and I will introduce the first one in a second. Let me just say we would use a similar approach like during the last round, so I would like to give to you the floor for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Maybe I need to indicate to you, maybe even interrupt you if we overstep this time limit, just to make sure that we have sufficient time for all panelists and for all 3 questions. And let me already indicate our guests and visitors here in the room, but also online, that you should have a possibility to raise your questions in the chat function, or hopefully we will have at the end a brief Q&A session. So if you have something, please let me know. Use the chat function in this for Zoom. So let me start with our first question, a very basic one. I would like to learn about your understanding. How would you explain your understanding of knowledge as a concept? How do you explain to us how the concept of knowledge needs to be adjusted because of the changing context we just discussed during the first session of our event? That would be my first question, and I would like to invite Haoliang Chu to share with us your views on this. Haoliang, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and dear participants. It's a privilege to join this Seoul Debate 2021 and to be among the distinguished panelists. Thank you very much. And on your question, Stefan, I would really agree with the view that President Son of KOICA mentioned earlier, that knowledge is really a process of learning. I think more, the Confucius version than the Plato version. But coming back more practically to our work for development cooperation, I think the key issues we're considering are that the traditionally we have this knowledge that for development cooperation that is coming from the developed countries, right? So the rules of development agencies like UNDP is to disseminate this kind of knowledge, and helping developing countries to adopt this knowledge, best practices and so forth, right? And normally we rely heavily on external experts, right? And who would come in and through typically a linear process of development process of cooperation through projects, through development planning cycles and so forth, right? And this is how knowledge has worked. You can call this an old knowledge, and but I think in this day and age, I think what we're seeing is that there are really other type of knowledge that have been generated, what we can call new knowledge per se, right? That knowledge is not the exclusive domain of developed countries, right? And I think the previous keynote speakers also mentioned that knowledge can be generated anyway, and this is a reality we need to look at. The problem with the previous sort of old knowledge type is that it doesn't always connect very well with local realities, fits the local context. So its adoption, is not always most effective, right? Whereas knowledge that's generated, among developing countries, and they are normally more, connected to local conditions, and really help make the best practices from elsewhere work much more effectively. So I think what's important for us is to recognize that knowledge is really is everywhere, right? And also recognize that as development agencies, we don't always know the best answers to a problem, right? So the challenge for us is to how to combine the traditional knowledge with the new type of knowledge effectively together, so that we work in partnership to solve a development challenge, which are normally nowadays very complex and very uncertain. And just one example, we have been asked to help some major cities to deal with the landfill problems. The landfill is full 20 years ahead of schedule. What do you do? Right? Neither developed country nor developing country have ready solutions to a particular context. Right? So I think the key is really how to combine these different types of knowledge and adopt a process of a joint learning. So I think this is really our understanding of knowledge today, I would say.
Okay.
I will stop here for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Haoliang, for this this initial input. I think that's really great. Working in partnership as one key term you were using. Thank you for this. Professor Kim, what is your understanding about knowledge? Is our concept of knowledge in need to be adjusted? So what are your views?
Yeah, thank you for having me today, and congratulations to the 10th anniversary of the Seoul Policy Center. Knowledge, especially in the field of development, I think is not just the information or intellectual discourse. Knowledge in this field refers to comprehensive information, skills, and expertise required to achieve desirable development goals. And as I think that is kind of tacit knowledge, not the explicit knowledge to achieve the development. That is difficult point. So when we say we share knowledge, we have to aim to strengthen capability by supporting knowledge, skills, and attitudes at the same time. The reason why I look back the fundamental concept is here is that sometimes we think that we just transfer formal papers or books and that is the knowledge transfer, but I don't think like that. So so we, especially here in Korea, when we say knowledge sharing program as the representative development cooperation program of Korea, and as President Son mentioned, the DEEP DEEP is also representative knowledge sharing program. But I think we need to, we have rooms to improvement in the future to adjust a rapid changing global environment. Especially, we have several points to consider in the era of global turmoil. Firstly, this society becomes more complex and uncertainty increases, as we discussed in the first session. So I think there is a need to adjust our knowledge of the mechanism of development. So especially when we say knowledge transfer international development, especially in terms of contents, many people talk about how to make progress. So the focus of knowledge transfer is on development mechanisms, I think. So in the past, there have been development theories proposed by early development economists, the groups in the 1960s and 70s, which have been marked as the era of development. However, in today's era of complexity, uncertainty, and rapid change, and such a unique or one way to development mechanism seem to gradually lose its meanings. And secondly, climate change and infectious disease and new technologies, which are the causes of rapid global change, are the problems both developed countries and developing countries. So traditional donor countries cannot tell much about the mechanism of its evolution to developing countries, because we are also going through the difficulties at the same time. So that is why President Son emphasized the mutual learning, not one-way transfer from donor to recipients. So in that sense, I think knowledge sharing now at this moment have a crisis and opportunity at the same time, because when we say uncertainty, that means we cannot predict the consequences of our own decisions. So it is difficult to share knowledge as a donor countries, because we are also going through unpredictable crisis together. That is the crisis of knowledge sharing. However, in an era of uncertainty, new ideas will be eagerly sought rather than existing systems or existing ideas. So to respond to uncertainty, new policies or new ideas will be adopted through competition between various ideas. So in that sense, I think more emphasis can be placed on sharing knowledge and experiences as a way to get ideas. So that is opportunity of knowledge sharing. Okay, let me stop here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Kim, for sharing your insights. And I think one of your main aspects that we have this kind of increasing uncertainty as a context condition, that this is of course affecting all aspects around knowledge and knowledge sharing, and I think this is a very important one. Let me turn to Professor Iyer. Professor Iyer, what is your understanding about knowledge? How about the question, do we need to adjust our understanding, our definition? What are your views? Over to you.
Wonderful. Good morning, Stephen, and very glad to be part of this very important discussion. And it's extremely timely, I can say, trying to gauge the importance of knowledge. What we need to understand is what should be the role of knowledge, and what frameworks will be relevant is going to be very central to our future pathways. Whether we look at knowledge as intrinsically valuable for human progress and human flourishing, or do we continue to view it as instrumental in terms of only generating, monitoring and evaluation of developmental outcomes. If we view it from the lens of human development approach, it needs to be rooted, and I agree with what Akim mentioned in the morning, in the notions of ethics and morality. And knowledge needs to be broader, as encompassing literacy, good quality education, and also generate frameworks of knowledge building. What COVID-19 pandemic has essentially brought out is that our failure to understand how do we adapt to losses in income, livelihoods, health on the one hand, and also how it has indirectly affected education and learning outcomes in an invisible manner. And as it is already estimated, for the first time since 1991, HDI has declined, and in fact we are seeing a negative progress in human development. Therefore, what I would raise as the first pointer is that international cooperation mechanisms have been inactive in terms of grasping the gravity and the importance of knowledge creation in this regard. We need to enhance and revisit knowledge within the larger purview of global public goods that would try to shape our understanding on education, health, intellectual property, and climate change mitigation. We need to seek to minimize the new categories of haves and have-nots who do not have access to digital frameworks, knowledge frameworks, so on and so forth. Hence, knowledge based on should be based on a new social welfare framework, which is rooted in ethical processes that addresses equity, sustainability across gender, class, and ethnicity. To drive this change, we need to be sensitive to the fact that the digital divide is breaking the back of education progress, particularly in the least developed countries and the middle income countries. We need to reinvest in capacity enhancing and capability enhancing education that encompasses inclusive digital economy. Technical cooperation must focus on capacity building of all stakeholders. By this I mean not just the government institutions or donor institutions or private sector, but also bring together the civil society actors, because they play a more important role at the local level. I think the HDR 2021 has rightly pointed that in the age of Anthropocene, new norms of public debate, especially with regard to economic, technological progress, behavioral changes, need to be constantly revisited and also new needs to be created. Therefore, the third point which I would like to highlight is the need for collective partnerships in the developmental cooperation process, whereby we talk about sustainable knowledge creation for enhanced capabilities. We need to revisit the process of knowledge creation, advocacy, and dissemination as collective action is key to crisis mitigation strategies arising from social, political, and environmental factors. So basically, the fundamental argument we need to understand is collective partnerships is a way forward for sustainable knowledge creation for enhanced capabilities. We need to revisit the process of knowledge creation, advocacy, and dissemination as collective action is key to crisis mitigation in the 21st century. And we need to remind ourselves that development cooperation for knowledge creation in the last decade of SDGs would mean that we scale up resources to ensure contribution to both expanding basic capabilities and enhanced capabilities to achieve effective knowledge creation. And I think we need to really work towards a collective process rather than a technocratic process. Thank you. I'll come in later.
Thank you so much, Professor Iyer, for your insights. I think this aspect on access to knowledge, intellectual property issues related to knowledge, this is really a very fundamental aspect when we are talking about those topics today. Thank you. Let me turn to Bruno. So what is your understanding about a current knowledge concept? In how far do we need to adjust our understanding about knowledge concepts? Over to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klingenbiel. A very good morning to all participants. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Korea, and the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and particularly congratulating USPC on their 10th year anniversary. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to share some of the thoughts on this very important topic. My views will be shaped from a practical, applied policy perspective in the area of development cooperation. Knowledge as a concept is fundamentally defined as facts, information, and skills acquired through education and/or experience. Knowledge in many ways, in very plain terms, is one, the product of learning, the outcome of better understanding, and a means to find solutions to our problems. It has multiple uses, and it can straddle across the spectrum from the product of the simplest instruction manual on how to operate a television, to the complexity of how a baby takes its first steps, to the advancement of science reflected in latest articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, Econometrica, and so on and so forth. I've prepared a slide for each of the questions, and I don't know if my slide is up, but turning to slide 1, knowledge can be complex or trivial. It can be tangible or intangible. Knowledge is the outcome of research that is, in turn, the product of investment in human capital. Knowledge as a process, and here I'd like to dedicate a little bit of more time, is what we tend to refer to as the knowledge management side of things. And it covers such things as spanning from generation to distribution, but it can also be broken down to such things as curating, disseminating, etc. Fundamentally, we look at knowledge as part of a process of value creation. Now, turning to the second part of the question, how do we adjust our understanding of knowledge? Now, to answer this question, I would argue that we need to ask ourselves, knowledge for what? And here I would say that to make sense out of this question, it really has to be context specific. We have observed two fundamental megatrends over the years that have driven the adjustment of knowledge. One is the pace of change of developments across our societies, and two would be the easy and costless access to timely information that is available with the click of the mouse. On knowledge management, the following trends are observable. So first, knowledge exchange has to be personalized. Knowledge has to be curated and contextualized, and it is important here to ensure that people have the knowledge that they need make the decisions and to be able to do their work. Knowledge isn't created in a vacuum, and that's another important point, but rather through partnerships and networks, as you can see from the slide. And these are both internal as well as external. Turning a little bit to Asian Development Bank, we look at knowledge as an important element of value addition, as I mentioned earlier, throughout our operations, comprising lending, grant, advisory work. There has been an evolution of sorts from the early days of finance plus, excuse me, where we believed that knowledge was part of the plus, to an inverse of sorts, to what we refer to knowledge plus, where the plus now was the finance, recognizing that perhaps knowledge was more important to finance across many of our Asian Pacific economies. And now we've gotten to some kind of balance in the pendulum to solutions plus. What distinguishes our lending, let's say from a commercial bank lending, is that we have embodied the knowledge that is inherent in our operations, and this is what marks the difference. And this is part of the value addition generated by ADB projects. If we support the building of a road, we recognize that that road has to be built to certain specifications, has to meet quality considerations, it has to meet safety requirements, and it has to meet the sustainability. So that's all part of the knowledge embodied in those operations. Finally, a point that has been picked up already by other panelists, knowledge is very much at ADB associated with two other important features: partnerships and innovation. And this reflects a conscious decision of generating knowledge either internally or in-house through own resources, but more importantly, through partnerships. We have partnerships with such institutions as the Korean Development Institute, the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and so on and so forth. And again, we recall that knowledge is not created in a vacuum. No one has a monopoly on knowledge, and partnerships allow us to build, acquire, and shape knowledge to make it fit for purpose. And I want to highlight that idea of fit for purpose. Finally, we need to answer the question of knowledge for what, and for us it is very much linked to innovation, which we believe can help countries address many of the development challenges and advances and make the progress required. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for your insights. I think that's really important to have some additional aspects. I think we all can agree on what you are saying: increase relevance and quality of knowledge. And my next question round will be exactly on this. How do you do it? Let me just highlight one other aspect of your presentation. I think you were saying we shouldn't continue just to count knowledge products, but to focus on providing knowledge solutions for clients. And I think those aspects are really very crucial for our next question, which is that we want to learn a bit more how your institution, how yourself, you think we can overcome some of the problems, some of the challenges when it comes to knowledge exchange. I think we learned already from the discussion so far that we have a couple of tricky aspects, that transfer is not something what can be easily done. I think quite often we also see that our work on knowledge might be not always sustainable, long-lasting. So my question to all of you is, how do you include those tricky aspects in your institutional or your personal approaches about knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange? Let me start again with Hao Liang. So how do you deal with those aspects when it comes to the concepts UNDP and BPPS, what we are using, how to make sure that we can reduce those negative aspects and increase the potential of knowledge sharing? Over to you, Hao Liang.
Thank you. I again will just start with a few thoughts. I think really the other speakers really provided excellent insights to the challenges we face, and their view on the approach. I agree with them. And as it was discussed, there are a few challenges we face. Right? One is that you cannot just cut and paste, right? Transferring a solution that works in one country or in one context and just put it somewhere else and you expect it to work. It requires a lot of adaptation, right? Based on the context, and it takes partnership. It really requires all stakeholders to work together, not just the government, as Professor Ayers said. Really, all stakeholders that are involved in solving a problem needs to be part of it. And actually, I have a good example from our work in India. In India, we worked with the government of India and developed the electronic vaccine management network, right? It was really designed during peacetime, before COVID, so to speak, and was meant to improve the management of the vaccine logistics, and also creating a big data application, for analyzing the needs and control quality and the direct policies. Right? It was really effectively implemented, and I think it is playing a very positive role during COVID in India, despite all the challenges we have seen. Right? Now we promoted this model in several countries, fully aware that it cannot just be a transplant, because every country has different regulatory environment, language issue, legal issues, and so forth, technical issues. But in Indonesia, for example, after many discussions, consultations, it has been successfully adopted as a system called SMILE, right? That is being used in COVID, just one example. Right? It used the same type of concept and approach in technology, but is adapted to local conditions. Right? So this just shows that even to transfer what is a success story from a developing country or any developed country, you need to really work very hard to adapt to local conditions, not just the transplant it somewhere else. And our Seoul Policy Center has also worked on knowledge transfer in an effective way for many years. One of the recent example is on anti-corruption, right? And this is related to a request from Kosovo. And Korea had a very unique and very challenging experience of anti-corruption, but it is a problem that is really homegrown and is developed with a lot of national consultation and discussions. Right? And it became a law only very recently. And that experience was very instructive to many partners in our network. Right? With Kosovo, we had a lot of consultation with the government and other stakeholders, and it was decided that the Korean approach is good, but the Korean script needs to be adjusted. Right? So at the end of the day, the Kosovo authorities adopted 5 indicators in the national planning system instead of the 20 or so indicators that were used in the Korean system. Right? So it just shows that knowledge exchange also takes a lot of curation, right? As colleagues were saying earlier. And our Seoul Policy Center certainly played that role of effective curate of this knowledge and its adaptation. And time is short, so in conclusion, really, I think we are talking about the transfer of knowledge, providing knowledge to sharing it and a learning process. It's really about learning, and in the process you build a capacity and of solving challenges ultimately with the indigenous local capacity. So I think these are some of the efforts we're making and we're learning in fact and to deal with these problems. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hao Yang, for those additional aspects, how to make partnerships happen, the need to have close consultations with partners on the national, on the local level, also using those examples on anti-corruption, India, etc. And I think the third question will be even more operational, more concrete on examples, but I think this is already a very important orientation for our discussion. So thank you. thank you for this. Let me ask Professor Kim. So we know that knowledge exchange transfer is sometimes a tricky business. In Korea, many institutions, you mentioned already, have experiences for many, many years about sharing knowledge. So how to overcome some of the main challenges when it comes to knowledge sharing?
Okay, as I have been working in the field of governance, I will speak based on my personal experience, and then I will also talk about Korea's international cooperation, development cooperation to the best of my knowledge. So as you mentioned, I worked the National Research Institute before joining the university. So at that time, I conducted a project to transfer knowledge by modularizing Korea's administrative development for public officials in other countries. So actually, in the field of public administration, in the past, from developing countries, they requested to us for advising a personnel system or education or training system for civil servants. But however, recently, partner countries hope to acquire administrative knowledge which is necessary in the development process to enter the status of middle-income countries. For example, Indonesia and Thailand are also requesting knowledge transfer on Korea's regulatory system or regulatory innovation. And Vietnam has also requested knowledge of the government evaluation system in Korea. So to respond to their demand and their new needs or new development needs, we did joint research together, and through the joint research with the partners, we recommended a design of the new regulatory system and evaluation system according to their context in Vietnam or Indonesia. So what I want to say is, for effective and sustainable knowledge transfer, it is important to work with the person who will receive the transfer and who actually use that knowledge. So in accordance with their environment, it is necessary to provide customized knowledge or solutions, as Bruno mentioned, that can solve their problems that they are facing right now. And secondly, we need to work together a long period of time. For example, as I know, about 8% of KOICA's budget is now invested in training program of capacity building as of 2020. So currently, KOICA training program has been transforming into a longer term program, for example, 3-year capacity building program, not the 1 year or one-time training program. So, and furthermore, after the training, it continues to follow up and provide a small-scale project when changes are made, especially based on the transferred knowledge. So this can induce real changes in the field. That is also, I think, the kind of a sharing process, the sharing learning process. So thirdly, and I also would like to emphasize the challenges that we are now facing amidst of COVID pandemic. So it is expected that the effectiveness of knowledge sharing will increase, even though amidst of COVID pandemic, if our efforts are made to continue sharing knowledge through IT technology. In that sense, Korea continues to strive for an efficient implementation of ODA project using IT technology. For example, we are now have converted our training program to be conducted by online, as it is impossible to invite the trainees to Korea as usual. So, and we also have a plan to develop an integrated platform for online training, which will be utilized by various Korean government agencies or actors who are involved in capacity building here in Korea. But we need to be cautious about technical glitch or internet access, because that can be the barrier for our partners in partner countries. But anyway, I believe that the limitation of time and space, as we are now here in this conference, can be disappeared, so the effectiveness of education may increase. So I don't think that we were going back to the same status before the corona, even if we overcome the COVID-19, because we came to know a new way of education is possible. So we must continue to strive to be effective and sustainable in a changing environment. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kim. I think that was really interesting, highlighting the implications of COVID-19. That COVID-19 is, of course, a limiting factor to what we are doing, but also maybe providing some opportunities for the future, that we have more technical possibilities to collaborate. That's also something that is important, and the long-term collaboration is an important factor for making activities, collaboration sustainable and effective. Thank you so much for this. Sandhya, what is your perspective about main challenges related to knowledge exchange? How to avoid them? How to overcome them? Maybe your personal experiences in this regard.
I would like to thank Howling to highlight the fact that how India has mainstreamed the use of technology and digital processes in India's developmental governance frameworks. Connecting to that, I'd like to kind of highlight how we at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, it's a deemed university in India, one of the premier social science institutions, has been involved in field action and research-based programs for the past 75 years. Knowledge and evidence-based work has been embedded in our work on SDGs, not only in South Asia, but even among the BRICS countries. I can give a couple of examples as to how have we really engaged with knowledge creation. In 2019-2020, we partnered with the United Nations Action Room for Reduction of Poverty. This is an experimental work which was initiated in India with a provincial government, which is Maharashtra in India, one of the largest states in India, for deriving, and this was basically in terms of localizing SDGs at the village level across 450 villages. So this time we have spoken about taking villages right at the grassroots points in the country. This led to deriving a unique SDG methodology for data collection involving local universities, and the more integral part of it was to involve youth using technology-driven data collection and generating evaluation methodologies for policies at the household level. What we are doing in the next phase in this particular endeavor is to enhance modules of capacity building of governance systems and elected representatives for the local level SDG planning action plans. The second action which we have done is we worked in the hilly regions of Ladakh in the Himalayas and border area regions that involved capacity building. Over here again, when we are using the term capacity building, it involved engagement with those elected representatives as equal partners. So we learned from them, we gauged their understanding, and also tried to revisit some of the nuances of their struggles in securing participation, empowerment, sustainability, and decentralization, which are the core principles of the human development paradigm. And the most recent action which I'm again anchoring is the social impact assessment cell at the Institute. We have brought in value-based frameworks wherein we have placed people, prosperity, planet at the center of the framework. One example over here is how we have tried to understand the Iran-India bilateral agreement on petroleum and natural gas transfer, where we have tried to bring in what are the effects of such infrastructure development on people's lives. So what are the learnings that we have derived out of these processes? Fundamentally, and I agree with the kind of broad agreement which most of our speakers have been saying, that the top-down approaches or the linear approach templates do not work anymore. Frameworks need to be localized and place people at the center. And here, I would like to highlight the importance of knowledge generation, which needs to use community intelligence and the importance of local indigenous knowledge to generate policy recommendations. That makes it more inclusive, more sustainable, and more participatory. The second point is, even as we would like to create global transition of knowledge across regions, variations in most regions have now become extremely localized, districts in the case of India. So we need to create sub-regional accelerator labs which will generate more effective participation. And I would like to underscore a fundamental point. Along with G2G, P2P, and community-to-community transfer, we are required to connect a very important missing link, which is a U2U engagement, that is university-to-university engagement. New measurement and methodologies need to be evolved to generate suitable indicators to capture the value of leave no one behind, reaching the farthest first, as they are often being missing in the existing frameworks. I would stop in there.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That was really very insightful. Just to highlight two aspects, the local dimension, how to generate this kind of local knowledge, and also to think about sub-national accelerator labs as one way how to localize some of our efforts. And I found also your example about Social Impact Institute very illustrative, because it shows we also need to have tools and institutions in place who generate important knowledge, what is sometimes overlooked. Yeah, so thank you for this. Thank you. Bruno, from your perspective, from the Asian Development Bank perspective, how do you deal with those challenges related to knowledge exchange? What are your experiences? How to deal with the tricky aspects? Over to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much. So from ADB's perspective, we've spent quite a bit of time and effort looking at this, this very fundamental challenge. And we recognize that knowledge at ADB has evolved. We used to invest in knowledge from a more traditional, sector-based, incremental type approach, low risk, to looking now towards knowledge as a fundamental means to transform and lead our operations and address, of course, our clients' needs. This is the most fundamental challenge that we face. And this goes to another point that has also evolved over time, where in the past our clients were seeking greater interest on things like what has to be done for us to be effective in developing our economies in Asia Pacific. That discourse has now changed more towards how do we do it? And this is where the importance of knowledge comes in a very magnified way. It's not a trivial transformation. What have we been doing? Well, from a perspective of the organization itself, we have a vice president for knowledge management and sustainable development, and he spearheads the knowledge work, which is divided into 3 departments: the research department, the sustainable development and climate change departments, which I represent, and the Department of Communication, getting the message out to the rest of the world. Within the SDCC, knowledge is combined, as I mentioned earlier, with partnerships, innovation, to give us what we feel is a powerful combination to shape our operations and better align it to our long-term strategy of Strategy 2030. In our department, we are divided on a matrix approach across both sector, transport, energy, education, as well as thematic groups, regional cooperation, integration, governance, poverty, etc. So this combination of sector and thematic support to our operations and building on the knowledge, innovation, and partnership ideal can help us, we believe, to strongly innovate as far as our operations are concerned. I've put up a slide, and this is now slide 2, because I wanted to discuss a little bit on a very important investment that we just had approved earlier this year, which is the Knowledge Management Action Plan, or KMAP. The KMAP enhances effective collaboration within the bank and with the external clients, so that constraints from such old practices as organizational silos are reduced, the quality of knowledge work is improved, and it also recognizes what, again, some of the panelists have mentioned, the increasing complexity of development challenges. Solutions do not come easy anymore. There is a need to look at not just how we approach a particular sector, but integrating multidisciplinary and multidimensional approaches to find solutions. We recognize that there is an important element of incentives. We want staff to be agents of change, driving knowledge, and for that we recognize that knowledge is a lifelong learning for staff at ADB and the organization. The Knowledge Management Action Plan is also embedded in a very important and fundamental aspect that we're looking at, and that is the Cultural Transformation Initiative. What are some of the values that we need to inculcate among staff so that they are more willing to take on and invest in knowledge solutions? Turning to slide 3, just a quick breakdown of what the K-MAP is about. So we recognize the interplay of 3 pillars: people and culture, process and systems, and relationships, going back to the networks that we were referring to. And then the plan has 10 corporate actions that you can see on the screen, which I will not go into, and the 5 principles. Very quickly, we need to look at the differentiated approaches. We've seen countries have different needs in terms of knowledge and development challenges. We need to be able to curate, tailor that knowledge for their interests. We need to make sure that there's a balance between demand and supply-driven solutions. We no longer believe in the top-down as an approach, but we need to build from the bottom up in terms of knowledge services. The whole idea of culture, which I mentioned earlier, and the idea of learning through a lifetime, that is essential. Technology, it's playing an increasing role across our societies. It's making changes happen much faster than before, and we need to be able to learn and scale on this technology. And finally, as always, we need to be very results-oriented, results-focused, and be able to, again, bring the solutions to our member countries. And solutions which are not just simply about what we see as what has worked well, but also sharing the experiences of other countries who have come up with solutions that can be informing other countries. So that South-South dialogue is also very important in this context. Let me pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, Bruno. Very important aspects. I think the whole question how ADB is dealing with this kind of complexity of the topic, very insightful. What does it mean for the institutional culture and also the KMAP approach? Good to learn about a new acronym and what does it mean in terms of driving concepts of this acronym. Great, thank you for this. Let's turn to our third question. This is about that we would like to ask you to provide to us some examples, positive examples, where you think this is a good illustration how you are applying your current thinking about knowledge and knowledge exchange. What is a good illustration in this regard? Let me start again with Hao Liang. I don't see him here on my screen, but he's still there.
By mistake.
Hao Liang, I think for UNDP, the Accelerator Lab approach was very important for the last 2 years. I think it's a very important example. Most likely you have even more examples you wish to share with us. So, Hao Liang, what are good illustrations, good practices for UNDP from your perspective? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I think Ambassador O earlier asked the administrator about the Accelerator Labs, and Accelerator Labs, is branded as the largest learning network, in development. And initially, it has had a set of 60, Accelerator Labs across, our country offices. Now it has been expanded to 90. I think covering more than 100 countries, because some labs cover multiple countries in our multi-country office settings. So I think what it does is that it is a unique set of capabilities, in fact, that we put in our country office network, and it has a particular set of functions it plays that is different from the traditional country office roles. For example, each Accelerator Lab, is equipped with like solutions mapping expert. Okay, it also has expert, focusing on explorations, right? So, and it also focus on collective learning, okay, and the collective intelligence, and through a very fast, informal networks. and working with non-traditional and quasi-state actors. UNDP normally our primary partners are government agencies. So this actually labs seek to really expand the network and working with other stakeholders in society. Right? It tries to do a lot of sense-making work to scan the horizon, right? To see what's out there, what is important and so forth. And so their ability is to really connect very quickly and share knowledge, practices where is needed, okay, from other locations, right? For example, if you want to really develop, if a country office wants to develop, nature-based solutions to deal with the kind of planetary boundary issues we're facing, right? So one of the challenges would be solid waste management, for example. But we know that there are a lot of solid waste management initiatives out there, okay? So what are the learning that collectively that can help at this particular location, right? So the Axolo Labs would mobilize this network and work on these kind of issues very, very quickly, right? So it is a dedicated knowledge sharing and generating platform that works very fast. That's for us. But I would just add that for this kind of capabilities to have a transformational impact, when you really needed to link it to your strategic North Star, your organization's major objectives, right? Because otherwise, then you will have a lot of innovations and but not the transformational impact we're seeking. So we needed to work at both ends of this, knowledge, generation, knowledge, application. Another example I would give is from the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. Right? The UNDP hosts this UN system-wide office, that focuses on South-South cooperation. Right? And one of its flagship platforms is called South-South Galaxy. Right? It is a platform that fosters, facilitates knowledge and solutions exchange between developing countries. Right? And it does 3-4 tasks very specifically. One is focus on knowledge sharing. Okay, so it is a platform that allows developing countries to share cutting edge practices from their own similar like-minded and similar countries, right? And the second is the advisory service and capacity development. Right? So helping each other with the knowledge. So the platform allows them to connect and help each other online, right? And through other means. And the third one is the task is the so-called partnership of brokering. Okay, that is really hands-on knowledge exchange and the transferring of knowledge and the practices with missions, with experts, and really get things done. Okay, and for countries that are needing support but connecting to a provider that has this knowledge and experience. So this has been going on for quite some time, and it has been mostly active, in the field of South-South cooperation. But these are just the 2 quick examples I would provide. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, Howell Young, for those examples. I think this is really important. UN Office for South-South Cooperation and related activities. I think since South-South Cooperation providers are very famous for what they are doing related to knowledge exchange, I think this is a very important activity. Howell Young, you also mentioned collective learning as an important element. Maybe a very quick follow-up question to you on this. If you are thinking about collective learning and if you are thinking about a challenge like now COVID-19 and looking here at Korea, I think one of the strong points here in Korea was the ability to bring together different actors, when it comes to the pandemic management, government, subnational level, private sector, academia with insights from science. So in this regard, maybe one final thought from your side, how about this kind of multi-actor aspect when it comes to knowledge and knowledge sharing? Any idea you wish to share with us related to this? How to bring together actors for knowledge sharing?
So you are still asking me to...
Yeah, just as a quick follow-up question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's a really important thing. What we have learned really is a very humble approach, right? As I mentioned earlier, many colleagues have touched on it. We are in a digital world where things are happening very fast, and the solutions are being developed, really every day and outside the UN. So the UN, we recognize that the UN is not necessarily the best provider of cutting-edge knowledge or solutions in everything. Okay, so we do specialize in certain areas of our strategic importance, but many solutions that developing countries require are not immediately, available within UNDP. So I think this is really why we actually believe that having the right approach and the capabilities to approach the problems, to analyze the problems together with our partners, that actually is more and more important in the future. Right?
Okay.
So I think with this kind of approach, I think it actually becomes fairly easy for us to work with a lot of partners, because we don't come with solutions. We come with what we believe is the right approach to deal with these problems. Just one very, very quick example. In Latin America, there are a lot of urbanization challenges. Right? UNDP has been working on urbanization for ages. Right? But of course, the questions persist. Why are some of these problems do not produce the intended results? But there are many, many reasons for that. Okay. But one thing that we did is actually really map what we do against the priorities that the local actors identify as the most important for solving urban challenges. Let's say three-dimensional, which ask them to choose three. Then we map what we have been doing with the governments together along this high priority axis. And you will see that they are very far from addressing the real issues. Right? It's just by simply working with colleagues together in a different way, we learn insights. And then we can manage this project in a portfolio approach, not just scattered programs, but in a portfolio approach that collectively we will produce the impact. So it's a mindset change for us.
Thank you for those additional reflections, very, very useful. Thank you. Professor Kim, what are your illustrations, what are your examples, maybe with reference to Korea when it comes to knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, what are best practices? Over to you.
Okay. Actually, I'm not the ambassador of KOICA, but I would like to talk about the project of KOICA, because that is I know, and I had examined for evaluation studies, and I think it's a good example that can show a new landscape for South-South cooperation, or triangular cooperation for knowledge transfer. So we conducted a project to strengthen the judicial capacity in Vietnam, and the project helped to establish an educational institution that trains judges in Vietnam and provided advice on new legal systems necessary for transition to a market economy. And the success factor was, first, I think the partner country had the willingness to establish the system through knowledge sharing, and I find it very interesting that Vietnam first requested support from Korea for professional judiciary training school in line with their own Vietnam socio-economic development strategies and sectoral judicial reform strategy. In fact, as I know, there were many countries that would have would have supported this project, for example, Japan and Germany or multilateral agencies, but Vietnam specifically asked for Korea. Because from an idealistic point of view, maybe social systems or policies or administrative systems or European countries or United States could have been better option, but Vietnam wanted us to transfer knowledge which was based on a common Asian culture and common Asian social system. That is the success factor, the first factor, I think. And secondly, Korean expert, especially judges from our own Korean judicial institutions, had been dispatched to work together in the institution for a long time. Actually, in the field of governance here in Korea, there are a few projects that provide such a long-term support and dispatching experts to work together in the institutions for several years. But this project was supported until the system was established and after dispatching experts. And thirdly, it was able to see the effect because it supported as a longer-term project. So it took more than 10 years to support this project and to see the changes in the sector since 2008. And currently now it is in the third phase of the project, which will end in 2022. So for more than years, KOICA has successfully provided support until the academy itself was completed and recognized by the Ministry of Education and Prime Ministers in Vietnam. And that is the point of another success factor. And lastly, as a scholar in policy studies, I would like to point out one more time about the policy transfer, because the success factor of policy transfer ultimately depends on its application in context, as we discussed it during our whole session. And so beyond understanding the concept or knowledge product, as Bruno mentioned, it is necessary to conduct a thorough contextual analysis or a situational analysis or a risk analysis together with our partners in line with the local context. Actually, it is easier to say, but difficult to act, I know. But anyway, that is important point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Kim, for those examples based on KOICA's experiences, and I'm pretty sure that President Son is very happy that you were using those examples. Let me turn to Sania. Sania, what are good examples, good illustrations from your perspective? And very timely, I received one additional question here from the chat. Somebody is asking specifically you, if you could provide knowledge sharing experiences from the grassroots level, and I think this is specifically where your focus is on, so please share with us your insights about best practices and concrete examples.
Thank you so much, Sifan. And I think it's so interesting to be part of this discussion at this point in time. In fact, there are two, the idea of grassroots is something we need to understand. Grassroots is not just about trying to see and aggregate understanding at the micro level, but essentially integrating the local with the global. That's the fundamental understanding that we need to. So some of the examples that it comes to my mind of the grassroots, that, as I mentioned, the localization of SDG initiative, which TISS has been doing for about 2 years now. We have been working with local universities, think tanks, and civil society organizations in generating data information systems at the village level for all the 12 major SDGs at the rural India level. In fact, the point which is equally important, as I mentioned, grassroots. As part of the India-Afghanistan bilateral partnership, TISS has been doing this work with Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, where we introduced teachers, educator, departmental programs, training programs, which is a blending mode where we had exchange visits of teacher educators of both countries. And we found that there is a stark difference between Indian and Afghanistani system, and the varying perspective on assessments were being debated at length. And what emerged very seriously is that the ideas of knowledge, critical thinking, creativity, violence, religion, and peace seemed more relevant as a discussion points as they were emanated from different cultures. So that is something I also look at what ADB is doing, trying to bring mainstream the question of differential cultural backgrounds. And the most fundamental point, as I've already stated some of the examples even in the previous question, is that we worked on infrastructure development, we work on issues on empowerment and capacity building. The key message that emerges from here, Stephen, is that knowledge enhancing initiatives calls for nuanced indicators and approaches, which involve social mapping of community under various thematic areas, not to repeat, but to reinforce gender, education, health, livelihoods, ethnicity, caste-based political organizations, GIS mapping of communities, etc. And most important is when we say grassroots again, we need to engage with community mobilization, local level engagement, and drawing on the multi-stakeholder dissemination framework, which involves all the three fundamental actors, that is governments, private sector, and society, civil society. Local institutions need to be viewed as partners and not beneficiaries, which I think is the underlying argument of the South-South cooperation and the triangular cooperation framework, which has emerged in a very important manner in the BAPA 40 framework. And therefore, to summarize and bringing back Mehboob ul Haq and Amartya Sen back on the table, we need to ensure proactive role of developmental cooperation for ensuring sustainable recovery. Knowledge creation should not be seen merely as a means to an end, but should be seen as an end in itself. And this becomes the central thesis which I would like to place, that the future of human development progress in times of Anthropocene would essentially mean scaling up developmental cooperation towards effective knowledge creation. Effective, which is much more broader, which engages with the realities of knowledge and learning collectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sania. Very important insights about the connect between the local with the global, and also hinting to the discussions around BAPA plus 40 as a South-South Cooperation Conference just 2 years ago. Thank you so much for this. Bruno, what are good illustrations, examples, showcases what the Asian development is doing with regard to our topic? Please, over to you.
Thank you. So I'd like to share two examples, recent examples, one related to the COVID-19 pandemic response and another one on the Asia-Pacific Tax Hub. So let me start by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic crisis has shown that while information, facts, and evidence is necessary, it is not always sufficient, and particularly in the context of making good decisions and policies. So we need processes which can bring together a diversity of expertise. We need to be able to apply that experience, tailor it, as I said earlier, to the needs of the countries. And even we may need at times moral judgment to make best use of knowledge. I believe this was also referred to earlier. Knowledge needs to be combined, we feel, at three levels. One is more on the technical knowledge side, the other one is the experience, and again, the third one is that country to context that we often don't seem to recognize as strongly as we should. I had talked earlier about values through our Cultural Transformation Initiative. I'd just like to mention some of these values which we feel are important are things like critical thinking, a problem-solving mentality, strengthening communication, collaboration, working together, creativity, and of course innovation. Now, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Steiner at the outset mentioned the importance of organizations to be able to be agile and be able to be fit for purpose and address the needs. That is something that obviously came through strongly under the COVID-19 pandemic. We had to react quickly. It was an emergency, and we put together under a CPRO, which is our COVID-19 pandemic response option, about $20 billion to help countries in terms of meeting their needs, in terms of budgetary support. Now, what I wanted to say is the knowledge side that came with that, I think, was an example in terms of ADB having to step up, and we did a lot of work that was not part of our job that we had done in the past. But we became very prolific writers. We had over 1,000 COVID-19 related knowledge products and services, and this ranged from such things as webinars, again, exchanging countries' own experiences and getting to learn from that process, to such things as a policy database, which we kept and shared with our countries. We had the webinar series on policy actions. We had many staff guidance notes to be able to help shape that dialogue with our countries, many multimedia formats that supported all this work. And that in some ways is what we go back to the solutions plus. It's finance, but it's also knowledge. Interestingly enough, as a result of this, and going back to my earlier point about how the speed of change is increasing so rapidly in this day and age, there was a lot of interest and demand from our countries on what happens next. So this whole idea of the new normal studies came out in a very big way. We're seeing in sectors such as transport or education that there will be very rapid transformations of how we traditionally deliver services. And there is now an important premium to learn of what should we be doing to get ready for tomorrow. So the whole idea is that certainly in our knowledge group, we need to be ahead of the curve. We need to be looking at how to better anticipate today what tomorrow will bring. And these are some of the more recent work that we've been doing. In terms of the Asia-Pacific Tax Hub, so we recognize that whether it's SDGs, whether it's green resilience, climate change, whether it's obviously the importance of strengthening our health systems, we need to have a means to mobilize additional revenue, and in particular, in this case, taxes. So here we thought, okay, ADB has been supporting countries on the taxation side, but there are other important actors in this space, including IMF, UN, World Bank, OECD. So how would we best be able to bring together that partnership in a way that would support countries? So the idea of the tax hub came up, and that was basically saying, look, we're not going to be competing with different institutions, we're going to be collaborating, we're going to be working together. The demands in terms of solutions across our countries are such that we need to combine forces. And here we thought about how we can use knowledge as the driving force to bring both the countries, the developing member countries, as well as development partners together. And I think that this shows a powerful way of how we can bring together and aggregate knowledge on common platforms that will make a bigger difference in terms of addressing, again, those constraints and challenges that countries face. So these have been two examples of how I think knowledge has been coming out more strongly and having to change and recognize some of those challenges to be able to deliver more effectively. Let me pause there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruno. There's a lot to learn from ADB and Manila, so thank you for your two illustrations. Just in terms of very quick, takeaways, three quick points. The first one, what I found interesting in this discussion is, I mean, knowledge is a very fundamental pillar of development cooperation since the beginning, but still the concept is evolving, and we need to continue this kind of reflection, how we need to adjust. So that's one point. The second one, those principles around effective knowledge exchange, I think this is really something what is important, and you mentioned many good illustrations in this regard, the localization, the partnership approach, etc. So principles together with tools and institutions, I mean, I can't go to the details, but this I found really very, very important. My last point, I think, was good that we came from the concept of knowledge to how to make it happen, to concrete examples. That was already great. During our next and third session, we will be even more specific when it comes to our modality, what we call SDG partnerships here from the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. So we use three illustrations with regard to Bangladesh, India, and Rwanda, and looking forward to apply those discussions we were just having to those three concrete illustrations. So thank you so much, Professor Kim. Thank you so much, Professor Iyer. Thank you so much, Bruno. Thank you so much, Hao-Liang. And I give back to our MC.
Thank you very much. I'm Haejin Park, Communications and Partnership Specialist of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, and I'm happy to take over from Ajong as MC for this session 3. Let me introduce our moderator for session 3, Artemy Izmestiev, who is policy specialist at the UNDP Seoul Policy Center. He has been with the center since 2011, and he works on sharing Korea's development experiences, effective development cooperation, financing for development, and SDGs. He has worked in various development policy issues in Tajikistan, Ghana, Malawi, and UNDP headquarters as well. So with that, let me hand over to Artemy. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Haejin. And I think that the two first sessions framed this discussion really well. And with this session, I would like to turn to a different dimension of this debate, which is essentially the institutional dimension. How the countries, how the institutions within those countries that work on knowledge sharing actually practicalize all these concepts. And we at UNDP Seoul Policy Center from last year started working in a very focused way on this issue. And we did two things. One was the promotion of the sort of international policy dialogue. We organized discussions, for example, at the high-level political forum at the UN to discuss how COVID-19 is changing the world of the development cooperation knowledge sharing and how the national institutions are adapting to this new context. But besides this, we had an enormous privilege to work with 3 countries around the world that are putting themselves very well on the sort of world knowledge map through the national institutions that share their experience and their expertise, which are Rwanda, India, and Bangladesh. We are very glad to have representatives of those countries here with us today for today's discussion. And I would like to basically start the discussion of the session with the first question. Is basically what can the respective countries offer in terms of the knowledge and practices in the context of the implementation of the SDGs, and how can the rest of the world know about it, and what are the challenges in the process of the knowledge sharing. Now, before we start with our representatives from various countries, I wanted to give the floor to Professor Kim, who has been a very important supporter on this discussion, to present also some considerations from Korea. Professor Kim, over to you.
Right, thank you for having me. Oh, my voice is quite loud. All right, so I think I'm kind of the academic person, so I have some freedom to say, like the critical way. So I got the question number 1. It's like the Korean case in terms of knowledge sharing, and then it asked me like what worked well with what are the challenges of the South Korean case for knowledge sharing program. So I would like to say, firstly, the know-how of how a specific country, just like South Korea, has successfully achieved economic growth and political democratization is always like a homegrown project. So it means like that we cannot transfer unilaterally our knowledge on the development to other countries. So such knowledge cannot be imported from the outer world and cannot be imposed by the other country, donor countries. So we have to respect some of the local culture, local know-how, and how we can share what I learned from the path of the history for development, I mean economically and socially, with the other, the recipient countries' context. So sharing Korea's unique experiences on economic and social development can be regarded as one of the best practices that other developing countries refer to as. So in that context, I will explain a little bit about the South Korea, the signature program in terms of knowledge sharing. That is the KSP, knowledge share program. KSP basically designed to share the South Korea's historical experiences and knowledge for economic and social development. But in my understanding, KSP is more likely has been focusing on economic aspects of development of South Korea. So they have to develop in terms of economic growth and some economic policies, monetary and other the macroeconomic and the microeconomic policies. So due to time limit, I just jump into my key points. So I think that what are the challenges of the KSP? Given that KSP is given more weight on the economic aspect of South Korean experiences and development, so now it's a high time to the change like the contour of KSP, just like the KSP should include and enrich the political aspects of development. I think particularly democratic transition and democratization and democratic consolidation by reflecting the Korean experiences on democratization processes in the late 1980s. Why I'm just de-emphasize that on that part as the key challenges to KSP or the KSP, the 2.0, because of Myanmar case and other, the developing countries in a democratic crisis. So we can give some kind of our experiences to them. But the thing is how we can share our the memories and experiences on the democracies, our democratization process with the other recipient countries, developing countries. So we can make some kind of knowledge sharing by looking at looking back on the South Korean experiences in democracy and the democratic transition. And also we can include in the next stage of KSP like the new agendas of human security. So the process of peace building in the conflict zones, or the South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. We didn't try yet to include South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation. South Korea could be working as the bridge and connector between the global North and global South, or the South-South and the other international organization. So we did not give more in detail on how to implement the South-South cooperation, but we can accumulate what I've done and what I learned from our experiences for South-South cooperation. And then also we can think of private sector engagement. What I'm trying to say is like the knowledge on how to handle the corona pandemic of South Korea. So South Korea have some kind of good practices of how to flatten the corona pandemic, COVID-19 curve, and also how we can just mobilize and cooperate with other civil sector, private sector to deal with the corona pandemic. So we can accumulate the other way of the KSP by including the private sector engagement or civic engagement, or some of the PPP like private and public partnership on how to handle the current pandemic. So I think the next stage is what and how South Korea gives the contribution on knowledge sharing with the developing countries. I think we have many different issues like new agenda, the post-corona pandemic period. So we can proactively include like the new agenda, already I mentioned, the democracy and the peace building and South-South cooperation or triangular cooperation and private sector engagement, and also finally how to handle the current pandemic. So all in all, we have done so far working very well, but we have also in the face of the many challenges, so we can work together with the developing countries. So because once again, we cannot give our knowledge, our experiences unilaterally to the other countries. Yeah, that's all I have for the first question.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, and I see it already as a common thread in our discussion. It was also highlighted by the UNDP administrator, and it was highlighted by the President Son in the introductory session, that the simple transfer doesn't work, and that this is always a process of co-creation. It's a process that includes some elements of mutuality. And also thank you, of course, for bringing up the experience of the KSP. We had the privilege of having Professor Son here, so we discussed the DEEP program, but of course it's really important to consider KSP when we discuss Korea's knowledge sharing. And the important dimension of what is being shared and what are the sort of the focus areas and what are the interpretations is something that I wanted to actually park now and build upon a little bit later in this discussion, because I think that this is a very important issue to address. With this, I also wanted to thank for all the online participants that are still lingering. I know from my own experience that it's quite difficult to participate in long online events. Ours has been quite long. Thank you very much for staying with us, and thank you very much for the questions that keep on coming. I would like to encourage you to submit more questions. And with this, I wanted to turn to my colleague in India, Nadia Rashid. She's a deputy resident representative in UNDP India, to share her perspectives.
Thank you so much, Artemi. And let me begin by thanking the UNDP Seoul Policy Center and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for hosting this dialogue, and I'm very pleased to be part of this distinguished panel. India, of course, is a country that is quite critical to the achievement of the overall SDG agenda. It's containing almost 1/5 of the world's population. And so progress on SDGs in India will have a really key role in shaping global progress on the SDGs. Now, the government of India has very much prioritized the SDG agenda. They've shown a very strong commitment to the agenda and have put in place a number of processes to strengthen how the agenda is implemented in such a large and complex country. And beginning at the national level, there's been quite robust mechanisms that have been set up for national level coordination and monitoring. And also this is complemented by a very strong role at the state level. So India has 36 states and union territories. Each of them is the size of most countries. And at the state level, it's really state governments that take the lead in translating the SDG agenda into a vision for that state, putting in planning processes, implementation processes, monitoring processes, to also ensure that they're advancing the SDG agenda at state level. For us at UNDP, we partner with the government of India, both at the national level and at the state level. So at the national level, we work on supporting SDG localization, which is so critical in a country that's so large. So we work with the national government on promoting SDG localization. And we also, as part of the UN system, support the government with the national indicator framework. At the state level, we work with several governments in establishing SDG coordination centers. And these centers are absolutely critical to ensuring that there is multi-sectoral engagement, engagement of different stakeholders, to really help advance an agenda that's a whole of government agenda in implementing the SDGs. And that also allows a lot of learning, knowledge sharing, across different departments and among different stakeholders. So these SDG coordination centers really become extremely important knowledge platforms, advocacy platforms. They also enable capacity development to build awareness around the SDGs, to help reach particularly key stakeholders who have an important role in SDG implementation, including government officials, academia, civil society, private sector partners to promote ways in which they can contribute to the SDG agenda, to help promote how they can, through their own mandates, really bring more relevance to the SDG agenda and how that agenda impacts on promoting their mandates. So for us, this is really an approach that is quite a unique approach in many ways, given the size of India and the challenges faced in India. But it's also a country that's really come up with some very innovative ways of helping to promote the SDG agenda and monitor the SDG agenda in such a large and complex country. So I'll just give a couple of examples of how that's happening. One example is the SDG India Index, which has supported a national dashboard that enables monitoring of progress across states and between states, seeing how states are doing, how comparing states to each other and seeing how they rank, where there's progress, where there's challenges. And this has really helped to spur SDG action at the state level and interest at the state level by also promoting a little bit of competition between states. Another very innovative approach is India's Aspirational Districts program, which brings a very special focus on districts that are lagging behind when it comes to development indicators. So through this program, the government is prioritizing 112 poorly performing districts when it comes to some of the key development indicators, and putting in place some very dedicated support to help improve development indicators. So for us, our partnership with the Seoul Policy Center has been an opportunity to really look at how we can strengthen knowledge exchange both within India, but also between India and other countries. So we're working together with the UNDP Seoul Policy Center to look at ways that we can strengthen knowledge exchange by putting in place a knowledge exchange platform that allows learning from what works in one place, looking at experiences and how they may be relevant to other parts of India. And this kind of exchange is really critical to building collaboration, building awareness on approaches that have proved effective and interesting. And so we had, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, an opportunity to have a dialogue and exchange of experience with Korea, looking at SDG localization experiences in India and Korea, and innovations that the two countries could learn from each other. So we're very much looking forward to more opportunities to have these kinds of dialogues, and we find that these have been extremely important in addressing what is a very complex agenda and learning how different countries are approaching the issues of SDG localization. Back over to you.
Thank you very much for this, Nadia, and I think that the sheer size of India as a country and its complexity is an important reminder for us that, you know, before talking about the cross-border knowledge sharing, it's also important to understand how this knowledge gets, as well as the indicators and so on, get actually produced, integrated within the country, and can sort of be a positive spin for the country level work. So this is a very important consideration, and I hear from the colleagues that some of the questions that came earlier were actually about this sort of knowledge management at different levels, and I think your intervention is an important reminder of that. With this, I wanted to turn to our next speaker. It's our pleasure to have right here with us Ambassador Yasmin Amri Sood, and you know, frankly, having worked in different African countries, I have been a lot at the receiving end of the Rwandan good practices and knowledge, sort of having demanded from my Rwandan counterparts information on them. But therefore, I was really glad also to see how Rwanda sort of positioned itself as a knowledge provider with the establishment of the Rwanda Cooperation Initiative. So it would be great to hear about the experience of the country and your thoughts about the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. It's quite a pleasure to follow the previous panelists, especially for us as Rwanda, as we join this journey of sharing knowledge as newcomers, I might say. We are very thankful to the UNDP Seoul Policy Center for being a great partner for the past years. And we believe that being here today and celebrating also, taking the time to celebrate the 10 years anniversary is really a joy for us and quite an opportunity to really give our congratulations. For the case of Rwanda, I would say that it's a bit particular. Like we said, we've had a very particular history, which put us in a position where we had demand to share our experiences. And it is for us a very new journey that we started only in 2018 with the Rwanda Cooperation Initiative, where we try to formalize this demand we had from partners to share what was our journey and what we learned towards it, and pretty much figuring out the best way to share it. The previous panelists talked about this kind of transformation and permanent adaptation of the world we live in and what the development agencies have to do and how to be relevant and to the people they serve and also to the needs of these new changes, being the pandemics, the technology and everything. And I think for us, when Rwanda Cooperation Initiative was thought of and started, we were glad to be able to take advantage of this new momentum and the new wave. Unfortunately, the country in 1994 basically had to go through a very difficult time after the genocide against the Tutsi. And the past 27 years have been a road to rebuild. And we've been quite fortunate that our efforts have paid off. And we've been able to be part of the world's fastest growing economy until, of course, COVID-19 hit. And this has given us a lot of learning and experiences that we could share with other people. So with creating Rwanda Cooperation, our main idea was to share two parts of our journey key takeaways, which was first our homegrown initiatives, where we had three main pillars where we felt our experience were requested by our other partners. And these were in governance and justice, in economy, and as well in social welfare. In governance, we had different experience, but I would say the one that really created a lot of interest was the Gacaca courts, which during the genocide against the Tutsi, we lost more than 1 million people. And therefore, the justice system was very challenged on how to cope with how to give justice and what does justice mean in this kind of scale and in this kind of setup. And keeping in mind that as you have to give to people justice, you are in a situation where the basic and the pillars of the institution, jurisdictions and judicial stuff are not really there. So we went back to a traditional system we used to use that is called gacaca, where you have members of the community that stand out, that are decided by people that are actually going to be presiding as judged. And we managed to trial an extensive amount of trials. And this gave two things. One, it was able to give to victims and their families access to the truth, which is usually the most difficult part in terms of conflict, is that because of the extent of the victims and the massacres, it's difficult to be able to write down, document, and give the victim family through a real story of what happened to the victims when they are deceased. And also to trial people that had done the atrocities. And this was for us at that time a solution, but we didn't necessarily directly see it as a knowledge sharing until the request came and we did the work on how to implement this SDG. In terms of economy, we did the same thing. We on the homegrown initiatives, we tried to figure out what makes sense, and the same thing in social welfare. The second pillar was really on good practices. And the good practices really encompass what other panelists said before, which was to say, how do you give relevancy to what is in your context, in another context? And we took the deliberate choice to really customize any advisory or any approach. So because we did the same, usually the good practice are what we borrowed from international community and we adapted to the local situation. And this really sometimes gives the option of more accessible financially to partners, solutions that are more accessible financially, and answers to that point of saying, knowledge sharing is not about what the country has in terms of economy results, but it's also about just purely knowledge. So I'd say those are the two things. And just to touch on the challenges that you talked about, as a new development agency, I think the biggest challenge has been how to cope with the big demand, especially in this pandemic era. And the second one as to how do you manage to cope with the demand and also allow the time to communicate and raise awareness, not only nationally, regionally, but also internationally. Of course, COVID has pushed us to a more digital world, but it still requires that the team and we set up in terms of skills and resources to be able to share that knowledge. So I would say on this point that that would be our main input. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, Rwanda is a real inspiration when it comes to the development path that it went through, and now when it comes to the model of knowledge sharing that it established. Both times when I visited Rwanda, it was I went from Ghana with my Ghanaian counterparts, and I saw how Rwanda has also been benefiting after '94 from the experience from across the region. We were always hosted by Ghanaian experts posted in different ministries, and it's really great to see that right now it built this world-class very sort of cutting-edge system of knowledge sharing that even has problems of coping with demand, and not only on technical issues, but also on very sensitive ones such as truth and national reconciliation. So thank you very much for this. And now I would like to turn to another very important partner, Dr. Nahid Rashid. She's an additional secretary and wing chief at the Economic Relations Division of Bangladesh. Dr. Rashid, over to you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. and dear panel members, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and UNDP Seoul Policy Center for organizing this kind of webinar, the panel discussion. And you know, it's indeed an honor for me to join this forum to share the experience of the achievements and development of South-South and Triangular Cooperation in Bangladesh. Distinguished participants, you know that many countries in the South have developed significant financial and technical capacities. All these efforts were reaffirmed and extended with the adoption of 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development by the UN General Assembly. In the current global scenario, a strong and prospective cooperation mechanism called South-South Cooperation is rapidly gaining global recognition and institutionalization among the underdeveloped and developing countries in the face of shrinking foreign assistance. In these circumstances, South-South Cooperation is a very important platform for developing countries like Bangladesh. Furthermore, it has become essential for Bangladesh to take a more prominent role in achieving the SDG targets by 2030 through this platform. And Bangladesh has been actively taking part in the cooperation under this South-South platform, and it has serious importance to multi-stakeholder involvement of Bangladesh in South-South and Triangular Cooperation to share Bangladesh's development innovation, particularly in regard to effective service delivery. Distinguished panelists, therefore we see that this South-South has a major significance for Bangladesh, as there is an increasing demand for quality public service in Bangladesh, which is exerting more pressure on the available stock of resources. At the same time, the current trend of declining assistance from traditional source of foreign assistance is not enough to guarantee mobilizing of such a massive amount of resource needed. And the situation is becoming more and more complex in the face of COVID-19 around the globe. Most significantly, what I would like to mention is that this South-South Cooperation is an effective cooperation mechanism in the development trajectory of Bangladesh. We are now implementing our Vision 2021 to see ourselves as a middle-income country, and Vision 2041 to transform the country into a developed one. Look, we are in the process of graduation from the LDC category, and we are conscious that this transition would make us face a new set of development challenges as a middle-income country. This graduation towards a developed country is creating a growing need for mobilization of substantial resources that are difficult for internal sources. As we embark on that journey, we wish to harness the potential of South-South Cooperation to address our huge development needs and challenges. Bangladesh has already included South-South Cooperation in its national policy for development cooperation and in various programs and platforms. You know, South-South Cooperation has become an essential part for Bangladesh to take a more prominent role in achieving SDG, as I mentioned at the very outset, through creating areas of cooperation between the southern countries and implementing good initiatives from one country to another. Dear colleagues, Bangladesh, with its exemplary success story of economic development, beating poverty and hunger, has the potential to be a role model for South-South Cooperation. We know sharing the best practice and knowledge is the main feature of South-South Cooperation for creating a global harmony and partnership among the global South. You know, some of the Bangladesh's successes have already been acknowledged by the international community, which can be considered as good lessons by many southern countries, and a number of areas And a number of areas of this success can also be highlighted and replicated in many other southern countries. Bangladesh has also organized matchmaking events in different countries, and Bangladesh has been enthusiastically trying to assist in the implementation of some of the best practices, including our Union Digital Center, Farmers Window, Community Health Clinic, Service Innovation Fund and SDG Tracker in Peru, Bhutan, Philippines, Somalia, Uganda, and Fiji. Currently, Union Digital Center is being implemented in Fiji and SDG Tracker in Peru. Through these activities, the support of other countries towards Bangladesh has also been increased on the other hand. And Bangladesh, we are not only sharing our best practice, we also try to study other success story. Next. Yes. We also try to study our other best practice and want to implement all those for our own development. Like, you see, Bureau of Manpower, Employment and Training. We have an understanding with the Nanyang Polytechnic Institute of Singapore. We want to have their experience, their skill development techniques to implement in our to upscale our young folks and to address the fourth industrial revolution challenges. And you know that Bangladesh is known a land of rivers, but the water is under threat. We have a huge erosion problem, water logging problem. But if we can see Brunei examples, it shows us how the water village can be built without obstructing the natural course of water and how it can ensure the environmental sustainability. So we can always try to implement other success stories to our own land as well. And you know, this exchange of ideas can not only solve the problems, it also helps to strengthen the existing South-South cooperation mechanism. You can see that for its outstanding contribution to improving and replicating the implementation of health-related Millennium Development Goal, Bangladesh has been awarded the United Nations South-South Award in 2011. And for its excellent achievement in socio-economic development and leadership role to enhance the South-South cooperation, Bangladesh has received the South-South Leadership Award given by the United Nations in 2013. And our Honorable Prime Minister has received the South-South Visionary Award in 2014 for her visionary leadership, and UNESCO honored her with 3 of these in recognition of her outstanding contribution to promotion of girls and women's education in 2014. Recognizing the country's constructive role in leading South-South cooperation ahead, in 2018, Bangladesh has been awarded the UN South-South Cooperation Award by UNESCO at BAPA 40 Conference. And I think at this stage, this is all from my side. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid. Well, first of all, I think during the previous session, Professor Iyer reminded us about the importance of the BAPA Plus 40 and the context of the South-South cooperation. So thank you very much for elaborating this. And another very important point that you told us, and I think that this is what a lot of institutions are still actually struggling with, is that knowledge sharing is mutual. It's about sort of providing the knowledge and solutions, and it's about getting information on the knowledge and solutions. And I think that this is a very important consideration that that is very useful to discuss in this context. Now, with this, I would like to also remind to all the participants here that in case you have any questions and comments, please feel free to either raise your hands or put something on the dividers in order to attract attention. I'll be glad to recognize you, and of course we invite the online participants to submit their questions through the chat function. With this, I would like to actually address some of the forward-looking aspects, because as we were reminded by Bruno at the last session, most of the questions that ADB has been receiving from the member states is what's going to happen next. What will be this new normal, and what will be the post-COVID reality in different contexts, for different sectors, for different institutions. This is why I would like to to pick your brain on the foresight basically question on how to prepare the national knowledge exchange institutions for the post-pandemic world, based on the international experiences. And let me start once again with Professor Kim.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Right, the second question is very absolutely important one. So I have to start from some analysis of the current situation of global governance in response to the corona pandemic. As well known, now we just witness like the lack of global governance in a proactive response to the crisis and risks by the corona pandemic. And also we now witness like the kind of the nationalistic, the coverage of the social policies, and then very protection-based, the policies as well. So it's like back to nationalism or the protectionism. Also the vaccine, the diplomacy, and the vaccine the allocation process. And I mean all that it's very important time to recover a better form of the global governance and development cooperation, as well as the connection between the national knowledge exchange and international experiences. So that is a basic the approach to the second question, because now we are heading towards the new normal. I think that everyone says new normal, and then we are entering into a new stage, new historical stage, to set new standard of civilization. So we have a very I have to say this U.S. China rivalry, and the other the great powers like the reformation centered around the G7 or G10. I mean everything is the reshuffle by the new formula of corona pandemic, the power politics. So new standard of civilization, who are the main actors to set up the new standard for a better life and better, the recovery of the global governance in this the new set of post-pandemic world. So my understanding, the countries which handled the corona pandemic in a successful way, like South Korea and Taiwan, is a little bit now in a different stage of the vaccination, and New Zealand and Australia and some of the countries in Europe are able to share their good experiences with other countries suffering from this infectious disease. So let me say world struggling to manage both pandemic and its spillover effects. I think the Korea and the like-minded countries, so-called the middle power, stands out in a global landscape of pandemic management and SDG 16 leadership. So I think they are of course not immune from the COVID-19 waves perfectly, and containment risks as well. But however, its fundamental approach I think, seems to be quite effective from the global perspective. So indeed, state capacity, trust, and leadership seem to be more powerful crisis management tools than specific government's models, democracy or authoritarian. I don't think that is not important any longer. So how we can rebuild, the real state capacity and trust and leadership in dealing with COVID-19, and also the COVID-19 management capacity is also contributing significantly to the country's soft power. So I would finally focus on the resilience. I think the resilience is like the next, I think the slogan for global society from the corona pandemic, and then it's like the really important, like the motto to connect developing countries and developed countries as one, like the world, the post pandemic world. So the Korea and international society needs to emphasize a risk-informed approach, and all countries like they face a wide range of risks and shocks and crises from the COVID-19 pandemic, which can range from being localized or short-term. I think such as disease outbreaks and the political tensions to protective crises such as conflicts and major natural disaster, and also the real physical wars, civil the conflicts. So the nexus climate change and disasters and conflict, and also like infectious disease as well, is very critically important with the growing trends of the resource insecurity and social polarization and the displacement, various parts of the planet. So all in all, I think how we can share the local knowledge, and also how to combine local knowledge with the global norms and rules. Basically the SDGs. So it's like the really important time to reformulate our thinking, our approach. I think on the basis of the resilience to cover up the new agenda of the new normal or the new standard of civilization. So we have to work together by using different knowledge, and then how we can draw some of the commonality from the different experiences in rebuilding, the new standard civilization. Otherwise, I think some of the strong powers, they dominate whole process of the new standard civilization and reforming action for the global governance. Right. So that's the personal view. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that those important considerations about the big picture that you are reminding us about is exactly the reason why we talk a lot about the fundamental principles of South-South cooperation. It means that when we discuss the knowledge sharing, and when we discuss this institution springing up across the global south, it's not just our curiosity of how country A did it and how country B did it. It's also because we want this world to be built on the sense of solidarity, and we see this institution as a natural expression of this international solidarity that is so important as we move forward. With this, over to Nadia.
Thank you, Artemi, and it was very interesting to hear those reflections from Professor Kim. We know that we're living through an unprecedented time over the past 15 months. The kind of devastation that's been witnessed around the world in terms of the health impacts of the pandemic, in terms of the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic, has very, very serious and long-term consequences. We know that progress in reducing poverty has been impacted. We know that progress in achieving the SDGs is being hindered by the scale of this crisis and the extent of this crisis, and having such a global crisis that's really touched on all countries is a very unique and unusual moment in history. Last year, for example, the Human Development Report produced by UNDP during the first wave of the crisis already highlighted that there had been a decline in human development for the first time in 30 years. And since then, of course, many countries have faced second and third waves of the pandemic that have been even more serious. So this really means that we're likely to see the negative impacts of the pandemic even further compounded. And in a way, this continues to be an evolving situation. Now, at the same time, we've committed to a decade of action on the SDGs. This is a very important moment in time in terms of achieving the SDG agenda by 2030. So the shocks that have been caused by the COVID pandemic really require us to rethink, as Professor Kim has said, but to also recommit to progress on the SDG agenda. And in that context, I think the SDG framework is a very important framework for helping to shape recovery efforts and helping to rebuild the resilience that Professor Kim also talked about. It really, the SDG agenda allows us to bring a particular focus to looking at how we can support recovery efforts that are both inclusive and sustainable. Meaning that it gives us an opportunity to look at how we can address issues of inequality, issues of exclusion, gender inequality, by focusing on the marginalized populations that have been particularly impacted through the socioeconomic and health impacts of COVID, but also looking at how we can help to address very particular impacts on women that we're seeing when it comes to, for example, economic impacts and social impacts. So the SDG agenda gives us that opportunity to refocus on inequality and exclusion and how to address those in recovery efforts. The other dimension that's very important, of course, is making sure that we also keep promoting and keep progress on environmental goals as a priority. It's important to avoid a recovery that sees us pulling back or setting back environmental commitments. It's important that the recovery is a sustainable one that continues to look at how we protect the environment, how we address the impacts of climate change for sustainability in the longer term. And so in this context where we're living with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of changes, unexpected waves of the pandemic, the role of knowledge institutions is actually a very important one in helping us to think through not just some of the existing approaches in responding to the pandemic and in supporting recovery from the pandemic, but also what are some of the emerging experiences that are being newly tested out, because there's a lot of testing and trying of new approaches to deal with a situation that is in many ways is one that is throwing up so many challenges and comes as an unprecedented situation. Again, I think knowledge institutions can play a very key role when it comes to promoting integrated approaches to development, and that means looking at ways that we can take a recovery path that allows us to promote and advance economic interests together with social inclusion, together with environmental interests. So what are the actions that can really help to promote a more integrated approach that helps us to address multiple SDG goals? And also, how do we particularly refocus on the commitment to leave no one behind and make sure that that is very much at the center of the responses? I also wanted to pick up on a point that Ambassador Yasmin brought up on the new ways of working. And so the pandemic has, of course, shifted ways of working for so many of us. And for many institutions, this change does mean that in some ways the virtual platforms that we've all now become so used to using can enable us to connect in new ways and can enable knowledge institutions to find ways of reaching each other, connecting with each other much more easily than we did in the past. And that's critical to sharing international experience, such as we're doing in our dialogue today. It's also critical to making sure that this knowledge exchange is happening very quickly and much more quickly. And this is exactly why, with our partnership with the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, we've really together looked at how do we help position the work that we're doing in these new ways of working and new approaches. And what we have agreed to collaborate on together, what we're supporting together, is establishing virtual knowledge networks for the SDG coordination centers that I mentioned earlier, to really help that kind of accelerated learning and exchange of information between these centers in terms of learning from within India and learning from other countries, so that we can facilitate knowledge sharing, scaling up of best practices on SDG localization, and very, very importantly, so that we can also make sure that we are reaching out and engaging effectively with civil society and with the private sector partners, as well as other critical partners. So I'll just conclude by saying that knowledge exchange institutions can play a very important role in helping to strengthen recovery efforts and in making sure that we continue to reinforce SDG commitments to help guide us in strengthening those recovery efforts. Thank you, Artemi.
Thank you very much, Analia. And, sort of taking your comments in the context of what India has been going through in the past few months, I take your sort of comments as essentially very positive. And I think that sort of your focus on the SDGs shows that they continue being a very important international framework around which to focus common efforts. When we had the consultations with COICA, with international organizations last year, sort of in the very beginning of the first wave, the big question was whether the SDG framework is going to continue staying relevant. And I think right now, sort of having a little bit of the experience behind us, we can see that it is fundamentally very, very relevant. And of course, we need to find ways of refocusing on them now, sort of taking into consideration constantly changing context. With this, I wanted to give the floor to Your Excellency Ambassador of Rwanda.
Thank you. Well, it's always a difficult conversation, the post-pandemic conversation. Overall, I think in the case of Rwanda, we've been, I don't know if the word is lucky, but we've been able to manage the pandemic so far. But we've all seen that it's a wave and it's a cycle. So you can never really foresee that far, because everything can change. So the first work for Rwanda Cooperation Initiative was to look inwards first and to say, as we have the opportunity of being lean, how can we be more efficient in our planning and coordination? First of all, to be able to really be able to move as the waves might come and go. And this for the pandemic or any other crisis. The second thing was to take into account that a lot of demand that came our way was for visits, because visit stays a critical request from our partners. So we've been so far able to keep it because of the numbers we've been having, but it means that we really need to coordinate day to day with the Rwanda Biomedical Center to be sure that our guests receive the best. But we can't stay assured that this will be the platform that can stay long. So we've also thanks to also a lot of contribution from the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, developed an e-learning platform that we believe can really sustain the post-pandemic part if we allow it to be flexible and to probably provide services as the request and the demand will be necessary as our ecosystem change. So the e-learning platform is called Rwandapedia, and it has a set of courses, and it also offers virtual exhibition. And we think that that format initially we answered a need, but we have to be flexible and understand that that format may maybe evolve and take more space as we go forward. But we believe it can really help in a post-pandemic part. And maybe the last part is, how far do we go? Because we have what we call our usual partners, stakeholders. But if the new way of life is virtual, it's also maybe an opportunity to go the extra mile and maybe go further into who we engage with and who we share this knowledge with, and maybe be open to making it diverse and maybe even to the end user as an individual or whoever. So I would say that at this point, this is what we are looking at. And again, post-pandemic is a very volatile knowledge at this point to be able to go further a month or 2 months, so things like that. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree that it's very difficult to discuss the long-term perspective right now, and we learned our lessons in this regard, that it's not easy to make assumptions about the future. But yeah, actually it was very encouraging to see that Rwanda Cooperation Initiative is continuing some of the study missions to Rwanda with some respect of the social distancing, but at the same time, I think your very practical interventions remind us of this, as Nadia repeated, the new ways of working, that it's a work in progress for all of us, and I think we definitely need to make the best out of them. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Mahid Rashid.
Thank you, Mr. Atimi, once again. Distinguished panelists. In this COVID context, sharing knowledge, research and best practices are much more relevant and important than ever. And in this situation, Bangladesh has faced a crucial situation. One way we have succeeded to manage health issues of the people more effectively. We can manage a low rate of death in the ratio of the affected patients. Despite the pandemic, Bangladesh is set to post the third highest growth in the world and the highest in Asia in 2020, according to the IMF. And Bangladesh is also successfully covering the vaccination process. And all these good initiatives and experiences could be pivotal for other countries. And we can also gather the best practices of others for fighting against this COVID as well, as I mentioned earlier. And what I tried to mention earlier, that Bangladesh is trying to institutionalize its internal support arrangements and external partnership through establishing a South-South Cooperation Cell at Economic Relations Division. And ERD is facilitating a national network with 27 line ministries, including BRAC, to monitor and analyze the best practices and to analyze the present situation, to support and facilitate exchange, peer learning, and partnership among the practitioners of South-South and Triangular Cooperation. In the post-COVID scenario, if we want to go back where we were, I think this forum plays an important role by sharing and gathering international knowledge through best practices. And there is also a high-level South-South Cooperation Task Force, which has been formed under the leadership of the Honorable Principal Secretary, SDG Chief Coordinator, and Secretary ERD to expand the area of coordination and attain the Agenda 2030 successfully, including the COVID. And distinguished panelists, you know that ERD has also partnered with UNDP Seoul Policy Center. What we have done is we arranged international as well as national events for sharing knowledge and best practices. Now, we are planning to develop a web-based knowledge hub in partnership with Seoul Policy Center for sharing knowledge, research, and best practices, where we will gather and compile the best practices, research, and knowledge products from the region and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, of course, for this very practical example of our cooperation, as well as the description of the current institutional setup and the way forward. That is also very important. Now we are, I think, nearing towards the conclusion of our discussion, because we start running out of time. At the same time, I would like to get the questions. And the question that I promised to also ask to the participants, the remaining one is related to what participants have already been mentioning throughout the discussion. How can we be efficient? How can we be basically from one side manage the knowledge management processes well, but from the other side be open towards different points of view? How can we agree to disagree sometimes? It's similar to the question that Stefan asked in the previous session, because basically when we were discussing, well, let's say the integration of different stakeholders in those processes, we understand that private sector may come with different views and different motivations. We understand that the civil society can sometimes come with different views, and at the same time we need to be lean and we need to sort of respond to the demands. So it's sometimes difficult to promote this dialogue. So I wanted to ask a little bit of your thoughts, of your considerations. In addition, we have a number of questions, and I wanted to recognize Stefan, who has a question.
Thank you so much. Is it on? Is it on? Thank you. Thank you so much, Artemi, and thank you so much for the presentation. That was really very insightful from Bangladesh, India, Rwanda, and also Professor Kim for this overarching framing. My question to you, I mean, what I was listening to great presentations, how knowledge exchange is organized in those respective countries, and that's quite different, let's say, from traditional development cooperation. So my question to you, maybe you have some kind of suggestions or advice to traditional development cooperation. Is there already something like a conclusion? What might be successful in the case of Rwanda, Bangladesh, India? What might also work in the context of other forms of development cooperation? I mean, we had traditionally those debates on aid effectiveness, development effectiveness. So this is still something what is relevant, and why shouldn't we try to learn from those recent experiences? So if there's anything what you could share with us, I would be really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This is a very good question, and we have one more coming from the chat. It's from the colleague, I guess, Khurshid Alam. It's addressed to Nadia, but I think it's relevant to all the speakers. He wrote, "Thanks for highlighting post-COVID sustainability. Pandemic is a failure of the way in which we do development, as well as our inability to foresee impact of our action and development choices. How do we create a new culture of doing development differently at scale and an accelerated way?" So with these three questions, I wanted to give the floor to you, asking all speakers to kindly be brief. First, over to Professor Kim.
All right. Wow, it's a great question, and then the also it's related to the guiding question 3. So in this case, regarding the how to answer those questions, I'm going to highlight the institutionalization process for the different actors, different stakeholders. Even though they have a different interests, different orientations, different even goals of partnership. So I will take the example of the state-society synergy effects. How we can the increase or enhance the synergy effect between the state and society, or the government and the civil society organization. Let's say like the well-designed, structured, and managed partnerships. I think can produce like improved technical policy solutions and also the outcomes. So from the instrumental technical viewpoint, a state civil society partnership makes sense. So the synergies generated can extend the capacities of both sides, state and non-state actors, beyond what each can accomplish by acting on their own. These synergies in turn, I guess, leads to higher levels of policy impacts and improvements in people's life, hopefully. So such positive outcomes, however, requires a minimum set of the facilitative conditions and government actions. So how we can provide or secure facilitative conditions and government actions? I think that is the institution. So we have to design, the institution by reflecting more different demands from the participants involved, and then we can beyond this direct policy results, state civil society partnership can potentially fulfill a broader function of promoting more responsive, transparent, accountable government. So the for civil society as the enabling environment for partnership becomes more conducive, and governments become more open to joint activity opportunities for engaging in partnership will likely expand. So let me take the South Korean experiences. So back in 2019, so 2019. The name is the partnership. That's official consultation outcome between government and civil society organizations, CSOs. So name is Policy Framework for Government Civil Society Partnership in International Development Cooperation. It's a long name, but it's a great piece of, I think, the framework. Partnership. So regularly the representatives from the government side and civil society organization, they sit together and talk together, and then they kind of consult with each other for the better the frame of the collaboration between government and civil society. So it's like the overarching policy statement and overarching the institution. So through the institution, all the participants can comply with some of the norms and rules assured by the participants, and also they control the other partners if the other partner violated the rules and norms. So that's beauty of the institutions. So how we can bring all together different actors into the framework of the SDGs or partnership? I think we have to prepare some kind of the common rule-based institution to promote partnership and embrace more actors, more stakeholders into that framework. Yes, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, and over to Nadia.
Thank you, Artemi. I'll try and connect the question that you asked and also the question from Khurshid Alam. I do agree that in many ways this pandemic and the risk of future pandemics is exacerbated when we have pathways of economic growth that are not sustainable and that really put our environment at risk. So it's extremely critical, I think, to come back to the aim and intentions of the SDG agenda, which very much is to have a very ambitious agenda that addresses our most pressing development challenges. And one of our most pressing development challenges is how we maintain that positive balance of promoting growth, promoting environmental sustainability, and ensuring social inclusion. And this is why while we need to strive for efficient processes, the consultations and the multi-stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical to the SDG agenda. We have 17 goals that really span economic, social, environmental targets, and we can't get there without engaging with a broad and diverse segment of stakeholders. And that includes also the commitment to leave no one behind, which really requires us to put in very focused and very specific intentional efforts to make sure that we are reaching marginalized communities whose voices are not included in our knowledge sharing processes, in our debates and discussions and so on normally. So it is, just to emphasize again, I think it is absolutely essential that we keep partnerships at the heart of the agenda, that we enable opportunities and platforms and dialogues that allow different and diverse perspectives to come in, because that's how we will succeed, is allowing those differences and those diverse perspectives that then ensure that we move forward in a balanced way, we move forward in an inclusive way, and we move forward in a sustainable way.
Thank you very much for this, and we will definitely try to abide by that approach in the partnership between us, in the work that we do together. And now, Your Excellency, Ambassador.
Well, it's a bit difficult to answer the question of Stefan. I think giving advice is always a bit tricky. But what I would say is that from our experience, something that is critical, I think, is the mindset. I think mindset takes longer than we expect. And I think the structure of the institutions themselves deliver something different. In the case of RCI, the deliberate idea of structuring it like a company, I think, really creates that idea that the partner has to be satisfied, and really, if it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work at all. I think for how to engage, I mean, do we need to engage? I mean, like Ms. Nadia said, it's obvious. There is no other way to go about it. It's now more than ever do we need to engage with the civil society and with other partners. And even if, like you say, business might be a different approach, but yet it's critical, because when we talk about climate change, when we talk about all those things, it has to be relevant to the people who do business, who really have to be part of the plan to really to see the SDG become a reality. It's more than just at government or state level. So yes, definitely, I think in my case personally, as an ambassador, it really also questions our role as diplomatic missions. What do we do for this? How do we engage other civil society to engage with our civil society organization and create a dynamic that hopefully becomes also our own ecosystem. So it is a sense of urgency, and really like for even all the other and existing structure to rethink what is my role. So if this wasn't in my role, then it should be part of my role. Because if I'm a diplomatic mission beyond the bilateral, I should also think, how do we, besides social and cultural, how do I incorporate this SDG in my activities on a day-to-day? So I really think it goes back to the initial plan of the SDG. How do I make it? How do we all get ownership of it? And rethink our ownership in this new environment we are in. Yes, that would be my take. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And this is really interesting that the diplomacy, the diplomatic sort of function in the era of the SDGs is becoming something very different. And our country office in Kigali is also talking about with the Diplomatic Academy. And this is also the approach that they have been trying to to look through the SDG lens on how what are the changes in the diplomacy nowadays to address the current challenges. So thank you very much for this interesting thoughts. And with this, I wanted to turn to Dr. Nahid Rashid in Bangladesh.
What I understand is, that this pandemic tells us about how to develop a new culture where we can strengthen our traditional development approaches. I understand, I believe that due to this COVID, there is a new way of development approach arising out of this COVID. And I think we can base on this South-South and triangular cooperation. This would be this can be strengthened, and we can collaborate more. We can strengthen our cooperation among the countries so that we can develop a new approach. We can develop a new culture. And what happened in Brazil and what happened in Italy and what is happening in India. Bangladesh is not free. Not only Bangladesh, every country has been posed under threat. If anything happens in India, in Brazil, or in Italy, so no country is free from that danger. So we have to work together. That is the bottom line, that we have to strengthen our cooperation and our collaboration. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and this is very good message to conclude with. And I would like to thank all the excellent panelists for this very enriching discussion that genuinely felt like a brainstorming, like an attempt to delve deeper in some of the technical issues. I think we had really excellent inputs, and we'll try to make justice to them in our report. And of course, we can see that this journey of the new hubs for knowledge sharing is very new one. Most of them are still really fledgling institutions, and they are fledgling in this very difficult, complicated environment that keeps on changing. Well, nevertheless, there is, I think, a lot of recognition of their growing need and importance around the world, as well as about the need to adapt, to use those new ways of working, and to be very proactive in partnerships with various stakeholders in order to be effective in their mission. So thank you very much, and once again all the panelists, and with this I'll hand over to Hejin.
Let me also thank all the panelists and to our moderator Artemi. We are almost reaching the end of the event, but before we do, let me hand over to the director of the UNDP Seoul Policy Center for some quick closing remarks. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Hejin, and thank you so much for the last panel. That was really a rich discussion today, I would say. From the beginning, the high-level dialogue, and also our two rounds with exciting panelists, that was really great. And I know it's difficult to wait for a long summary, so let me try to make it really brief. I have 4 main takeaways. The first one is the nature of development cooperation is changing in a way. This is not new. I mean, development cooperation was always changing, but I think the speed is quite different nowadays. With COVID-19, this has a strong impact. We have many other new context conditions. And I think 2 important aspects in this regard I want to highlight is we should less focus on this kind of north-south transfer philosophy of the debate, but more on global public goods. I mean, COVID-19, climate change, this is something where we have a global need to respond to. And this is much more, I think, nowadays, the nature of development cooperation. My second point, knowledge as a fundamental aspect of development cooperation remains relevant. I must say that I was very impressed by Professor Sohn's quotes, Plato, knowledge as justified true belief, and Confucius' knowledge, ability to distinguish between what you know and what you don't know. And sometimes it's good to know that, you know, what we are discussing is not everything is new. Some principles remain very valid, and this is why I really loved those quotes President Sohn was using this morning. My third point, I love the insights from our concrete SDG partnerships, and of course we also listened to other concrete examples. And what is really important when it comes to those SDG partnerships and those local experiences, this is that we need to focus more on jointly generated knowledge. Yeah, and I think this is probably also one of the main I don't want to say failures, but lessons learned from the past, that development cooperation was really too much taking experience from A, bringing it to B, and then we were surprised that this is not working. But to generate this knowledge together, and I think those SDG partnerships and also some other examples today illustrated that this kind of very concrete and local view is helpful. My fourth and last point is I'm really grateful to our panelists today. Great insights. Here, those panelists who are in this room, but what is probably even more challenging, those panelists attending, contributing online. So that's great, and even sometimes with you know, this kind of different time zone, also quite a challenge. So great panelists, really, really, I like it. I'm also grateful to the audience, online and offline. Artemi mentioned it already. We all know that those hybrid events, it's working, but it's an extra effort. Yeah? It's an extra effort. So I also appreciate your listening, active listening, also contributing to those debates. So really very much appreciated. Let me thank again the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea for the great collaboration for today's event, but again, not just today, but for 10 years, great cooperation between UNDP Seoul Policy Center and Korea. This also is very valid for the entire great collaboration between UNDP and Korea. So I'm really grateful for this. And last but not least, to my team, we all know that organizing a hybrid event is not half of the work. It's not even double of the work. but it's probably triple of the work because you need to be prepared for everything. Yeah, for everything. So many, potential risks, etc. We have a great team in place, and I'm really grateful for this team and all these efforts. So let me really thank my team for outstanding contribution.